Chapter 3:18. This secret meeting could be said to have parted on bad terms. Wang Tianzong didn't get what he wanted. Instead, he confirmed the hostile relationship between the Samsara Palace and the Wang family of Beihai. Qin Weibai had already left. However, her voice still seemed to reverberate in the ancient and solemn space of the World Palace. All of you should go to hell forever. She said this very calmly, very lightly. He wasn't gnashing his teeth, nor was he hysterical. It was as if he was talking about the most ordinary thing. It was calm and peaceful. Extreme calmness was a kind of madness in itself. Wang Tianzong could feel the determination behind the calmness. That was hatred. A hatred that would not rest until one of them was dead. The calmer it was, the more intense it was. Wang Tianzong was a little annoyed and even had some killing intent. But he still did not stop her from leaving. He stood in front of the World Palace, watching the graceful Qin Weibai get in the car and flaming fire start the car. The black Mercedes-Benz retreated in the silent night. It went down the mountain and gradually became a little red dot, becoming more and more blurry. Wang Tianzong was motionless. He was thinking over every detail of tonight's meeting. Although both sides talked a lot during this meeting, it didn't last long. But Wang Tianzong thought for a long time, even longer than the time of this conversation. It was windy on Mount Dibbing late at night. The wind with the fishy and salty smell of the deep sea blew over. The stifling feeling faded a little, and the flowers and trees in front of the World Palace swayed with the wind lazily. Wang Tianzong recalled the conversation just now and gradually calmed down. He would not let anything interfere with his judgment, nor would he make any decisions when he was upset. Most of the conversation began to fade from his mind. Wang Tianzong's eyes became deep again. There was a plum tree in front of the World Palace. The plum tree was not very tall, but its loose branches were extremely verdant. The species of the plum tree was black amber, cultivated by the Star Nation. It usually matured in late July and had an extremely fragrant and sweet taste. This was the only tree in front of the World Palace. Planted among the flowers and grass, it stood out from the crowd. Wang Tianzong walked out of the hall and looked at Li Shu in front of him with no expression. He was silent. The wind grew stronger. The wind died down again. The lights on Mount Dibbing gradually turned off. Thunder rumbled in the starry sky. The World Palace was silent. Standing in front of the plum tree, Wang Tianzong was as silent as a statue. "It's going to rain." A gentle voice rang out behind her. Summer Solstice appeared beside Wang Tianzong. She looked at her husband, and her lively eyes were filled with worry. "Let's go back first." Wang Tianzong shook his head and was still thinking. "It didn't go well." Summer Solstice asked. Wang Tianzong agreed and said with a smile, "It's worse than before. I shouldn't have invited her. It doesn't make sense." He never minded telling his wife about the general trend of the dark world and his own plans. Summer Solstice was lively and simple, even a little silly. She didn't care about anything in the dark world at all. Wang Tianzong didn't expect his wife to analyze anything for him. He did. She listened. She had forgotten. That alone was enough. Samsara Palace, Summer Solstice frowned. She was simple, but she was not really heartless. During this time, Wang Tianzong became more and more silent. She saw it and vaguely knew the reason. This was also what she didn't understand. "Why does the Samsara Palace give you so much pressure?" Summer Solstice asked. "Because of the master of Samsara Palace." Wang Tianzong's eyes were deep and gloomy. Summer Solstice knew the master of Samsara Palace. Not because the master of Samsara Palace defeated Gu Xingyun, but because that woman once took the 12 supermasters of Samsara directly to Mount Dibbing and escaped unscathed. "Is she very strong?" Summer Solstice's eyes were a little confused. Wang Tianzong was silent for a while, as if he was also thinking about the question he should have known the answer to. How was the combat capability of the master of Samsara Palace? "Not strong." Wang Tianzong thought for a while and shook his head. "But also very strong." Summer Solstice looked at Wang Tianzong quietly. From the point of view of the first on the divine list, the master of Samsara Palace was indeed not strong, although she now ranked very high on the divine list. In terms of pure combat capability, the master of Samsara Palace should not be a match for Gu Xingyun. Wang Tianzong said, Gu Xingyun failed 3 years ago because of his carelessness. He didn't expect that the master of Samsara Palace would use the 10th unique domain of Kunlun City. If the two meet now, Gu Xingyun will win. Although he will pay a great price, he is indeed a little stronger than the master of Samsara Palace. Then, Summer Solstice opened her mouth. Gu Xingyun was slightly stronger than the master of Samsara Palace. So even if he defeated the master of Samsara Palace, he would also pay a great price. Wang Tianzong was stronger than Gu Xingyun. Summer Solstice didn't think that her husband needed to pay any price to defeat Gu Xingyun. The gap between the first and the fifth on the divine list seemed not big, but the subtle distance was also huge. Kunlun City and the Wang family of Beihai coexisted in Zhongzhou State, not because their martial arts strength could compete with the Wang family of Beihai, but because of the general trend, politics, power schemes, balance, and many other things. Among the superpowers, the strength of a leader was very important, but it was not so important that it could decide life and death. Otherwise, the Wang family of Beihai would have unified the world long ago. But the Samsara Palace was different. The Samsara Palace developed extremely fast, but they had no foundation so far. The master of Samsara Palace was everything. Once she died, the Samsara Palace would be completely destroyed. If the master of Samsara Palace was slightly inferior to Gu Xingyun, why did Wang Tianzong pay so much attention to her? It's true if it's just about winning or losing, Wang Tianzong said. Wang Tianzong said. He remembered the hidden sword that the master of Samsara Palace used when she climbed Mount Dibbing. Her strength lies not in her comprehensive combat capability, but in that sword stroke. Wang Tianzong narrowed his eyes, which were a little cold. Any expert had the means to fight back in a desperate situation. But the sword stroke of the master of Samsara Palace gave Wang Tianzong a completely different feeling. The opponent's comprehensive combat capability was not so top-notch, but the feeling that the sword stroke brought him at that time made him feel a near-fatal threat. It was a fierce sword stroke that ignored life and death. The master of Samsara Palace would definitely die when the sword stroke came out, but Wang Tianzong didn't think that he could take it unscathed. He would be seriously injured, and it would be an absolute serious injury. This sword stroke was the key to the master of Samsara Palace's ranking at the top of the divine list. She was not strong, but she was also very strong. Just because of this, Summer Solstice's eyes were a little confused. That's one reason. Wang Tianzong whispered. The main reason is that she is a lunatic. A woman with an extreme and crazy personality controlled that sword stroke. Everyone would be afraid and pay attention to it. Qin Weibai said that the Samsara Palace would give everyone a surprise, even when it couldn't hold on. Wang Tianzong didn't doubt that. That sword stroke alone was enough to be a surprise for anyone. Wang Tianzong took a deep breath, took out a cigarette, and lit it. The phone suddenly rang. It sounded a little harsh in the silent night. Wang Tianzong took out his phone and looked at it. It was a call from Firmament. Firmament, an expert of the half-step invincible realm from the Wang family of Beihai. Even in the chaos of the Dark World, he rarely took action. Only a few core figures of the Wang family of Beihai knew that Firmament had secretly entered Snow Country with some elites more than a year ago. Wang Tianzong answered the phone. Your Majesty. Firmament didn't talk nonsense and went straight to the point. His voice was a little tired and complicated. He whispered, I just got the news that the Vladimir family has been exterminated. Even with Wang Tianzong's wisdom, he couldn't help but tremble when he heard the news. Vladimir, in the language of the Snow Country, it meant to possess the world. The Vladimir family did not own the world, but to some extent, it could be said that they owned the Snow Country. As one of the 6 oligarchs of Snow Empire, every important figure of the Vladimir family held an important position in Snow Empire. Perhaps they could call the wind and summon the rain in different domains. However, the news from the Heavenly Dome realm was that their race had been exterminated. It wasn't just the clan leader who was killed. Instead, the entire clan was annihilated. for such a deep-rooted oligarch family to disappear in the Snow Empire. Even before daybreak, the entire Snow Empire would completely fall into chaos. Who did it? Wang Tianzong said seriously. At present, all the clues point to the Polar Ground Alliance. It looks like an internal strife of the Polar Ground Alliance, but this is too exaggerated. Firmament said with a bitter smile. Wang Tianzong remained silent. The internal strife of the Polar Ground Alliance had reached the point where the Vladimir family had been wiped out, which was indeed exaggerated. Even in the Polar Ground Alliance, the Vladimir family was one of the core components and played an important role in the alliance. If it was just internal strife, it would at most be a matter of changing the patriarch, and the whole family would be destroyed. This was enough to shake the foundation of the Polar Ground Alliance. None of the parties involved in the internal strife would do this. The current dominator of the Polar Ground Alliance was code-named Tyrant. He ranked 7th on the new divine list. He was Tyrant, but he was not a fool. The Samsara Palace took action. Wang Tianzong said in a low tone. He did not have the most direct evidence to prove that the Samsara Palace took action. However, some of the movements of the Samsara Palace in Snow Empire in the past 3 years were enough to support Wang Tianzong's speculation. 3 years ago, he had invited Tyrant to the Wang family of Beihai as a guest. Tyrant came as promised. Wang Tianzong had reminded him to pay attention to the Samsara Palace, but Tyrant was soon distracted by the civil strife that broke out in the Polar Ground Alliance. In the past 3 years, the Polar Ground Alliance had been in turmoil, but it was still under control. The extermination of the Vladimir family was definitely the first fangs that the Samsara Palace showed. In the Dark World, this would also be the clearest signal, because it meant that the civil strife of the Polar Ground Alliance had been completely out of control. It meant that the Polar Ground Alliance was in danger. If the Polar Ground Alliance completely collapsed, who would be the new king in the entire Snow Empire and even the Dark World of Eastern Europe? At the very least, now that the situation was unclear, any superpower would have a chance. Wang Tianzong was short of breath. He didn't even have to think about the next scene. No one was willing to give up such a big benefit. The Dark World was in chaos. Now the Polar Ground Alliance was in danger. It would not stop the chaos in the Dark World. Instead, it would give everyone a reason to fight to the death. And the entire Snow Empire would become the battlefield for all the forces in the Dark World. Wang Tianzong could not stop all this. It was impossible for him not to participate in this matter. Snow Empire was too close to Beihai Province. The major forces were fighting in Snow Empire, which was definitely a threat to the Wang family of Beihai that could not be ignored. More importantly, in the eyes of the major forces, the Wang family of Beihai, which was very close to Snow Empire, was also a threat that could not be ignored. Wang Tianzong suddenly found that the situation of the Wang family of Beihai was so urgent. He still had a lot of things to do. Li Honghe did not die. Li Tianlan did not die. The cooperation with Kunlun City had not officially begun. Now Snow Empire, the largest country in the world, had become a battlefield again. If this was the goal of the Samsara Palace, then all this would not be a coincidence. Wang Tianzong took a deep drag on the cigarette. In the chaos, his eyes were calmer than usual. They were cold and rational without any emotion. I got it. He held his mobile phone. Wait and see. Don't stand out. I'll send someone there. When I solve the matter of Zhongzhou's state, I'll go there myself. Okay. Firmament's voice was excited. In the time of one sentence, Wang Tianzong's eyes had become calm and determined. Wang Tianzong hung up the phone and looked at the plum tree in front of him. At the beginning of July, the tree was already full of fruits. Although they were not completely ripe, the color had turned into a rich purple. Wang Tianzong reached out and picked a fruit. He wiped it casually and put it in his mouth. The unripe fruit was a little sour. However, Wang Tianzong ate very seriously and swallowed all the bitterness into his stomach little by little. It's sour. After saying that, he threw away the core of the fruit. His movement was very light, but the trajectory of the core was straight as a line and instantly penetrated the whole fruit tree. There was no sword intent in front of the World Palace. However, The lush fruit tree suddenly exploded in an instant. Branches, tree trunks, tree roots, everything was sent flying into the sky. A slight wind blew over. The messy flying fruit tree disappeared quietly. A deep pit on the ground became the only trace of the existence of the fruit tree. Summer Solstice stared blankly at the plum tree, turning into ashes in the air. She still remembered the scene when this fruit tree was planted in front of the World Palace. At that time, she was still a child. Wang Tianzong was also a child. Li Quantu was also a child. At that time, Li Honghe was still the god of war of Zhongzhou State, and Uncle Li for these children. It was a spring. Uncle Li, Uncle Wang, and several top figures of the Wang family of Beihai were in the World Palace. Wang Tianzong, who was still a child, and Summer Solstice were playing in front of the World Palace. Wang Tianzong took a bite of a fruit in his hand. He said, "It's sour." So he threw the fruit out and threw it to the front door of the World Palace. Uncle Li came out from the door and caught the fruit thrown by Wang Tianzong. So there was a plum tree in front of the World Palace. The plum tree planted by Uncle Li. Over the years, except for the name engraved on the stone of formidable person on the stage of formidable person, this plum tree was the last trace left by Li Honghe in Mount Dibbing. Now this trace, or friendship, had been completely crushed by the sword intent and turned into nothingness. The plum tree was gone. It seemed that there was no need for Uncle Li to exist. Summer Solstice's eyes were a little sad. Wang Tianzong turned around with a calm face and reached out to rub her hair. "Go to sleep first. I'll go to the lab and then go down the mountain." "Go down the mountain?" Summer Solstice's delicate body trembled. "Go to Kunlun first, and then Lin." Wang Tianzong's tone was calm. There was not much time. He had made up his mind and did not want to delay. Summer Solstice was silent. She wanted to say something, but stopped on second thought. Samsara Palace, Lin, Li Tianlan, Snow Country, great changes had taken place in the dark world. Even Wang Tianzong did not seem to be sure this time. Otherwise, he did not need to go to the lab to refine the immortality potion. At the critical moment, it was equivalent to Wang Tianzong's life. "Be careful. I'll wait for you at home," Summer Solstice whispered. Her eyes were a little worried. "Don't worry." Wang Tianzong smiled and said, "When I come back, nothing will happen." He walked past Summer Solstice. He passed by the pit where the plum tree used to be. Wang Tianzong stepped over it. The sword energy all over the sky suddenly fell from above. It pierced into the ground. The hard ground began to tremble, and the pit spread rapidly. The ground was collapsing, turning into a round pit with a radius of tens of meters. Water light emerged from the bottom of the pit. It looked like a small pond. All traces of the plum tree completely disappeared. "Plant some lotus flowers." Wang Tianzong said, "I can eat the lotus seed soup you made next year." Wang Tianzong stayed in the lab until late at night. When he left the lab, there was a crystal pendant around his neck. The pendant was crystal clear and had a strange shape. It looked like a small whistle. A few drops of dark purple liquid flowed slowly in the whistle, dazzling. He returned to the World Palace. Summer Solstice had left. The water light in the small pond that he stepped out became more and more obvious. Wang Tianzong glanced at it casually and walked into the World Palace again. The gates slowly closed behind him. It was dark in the hall. Wang Tianzong did not turn on the light. He just walked step by step into the depths of the hall in the dark. He climbed the steps and returned to the white jade throne, which symbolized the supreme power of the Wang family of Beihai. Wang Tianzong's expression was cautious. He touched an imperceptible mechanism behind the back of the chair. The white jade throne began to move forward. There was no sound. A hidden passage was exposed under the throne. Wang Tianzong walked in with a calm face. The throne closed up once more, and the moment it did so, a soft cracking sound could be heard. So the light in the hidden passage was on. The light was dim. Wang Tianzong walked in the dark passage for a long time. A bronze door appeared in front of him. The bronze door glowed with a gloomy luster under the light. 2 doors, 2 badges. The door panel on the left was carved with the family emblem of the Wang family of Beihai's firmament and the sea. On the door panel on the right, there were some messy carvings of lines. The seemingly irregular lines were indescribably cold and weird. The chaotic lines gathered in the middle and formed a vague outline. There were two irregular diamonds above the outline, like a pair of eyes. Devil's eye. Two eyes. The left eye represented passage, and the right eye represented destruction. Wang Tianzong reached out and touched the left eye. The center of the door panel was sunken, and a screen appeared. Wang Tianzong entered the password. Light shot out of the screen and swept through Wang Tianzong's body. Then, with a click, the bronze door opened to both sides. A piercing cold came to his face. The world behind the door was still a narrow and dark passage, but it was extremely cold and dry. Wang Tianzong walked along the passage for a long time before he came to another door. The same procedure. The second door opened. The world behind the door was an ultra-low temperature hall. The temperature was even close to minus 50 degrees Celsius. Wang Tianzong's breath was filled with white cold air. He silently scanned the hall in front of him. The hall was huge. Ice coffins were the only things in the hall. The ice coffins were lined up in rows, and there were hundreds of ice coffins. However, most of the ice coffins were empty. Only a small number of ice coffins contained figures that seemed to be in a deep sleep. In terms of location, this hall should be dozens of meters below the stage of formidable person of the Wang family of Beihai. The figures in a small number of ice coffins were the most hidden power of the Wang family of Beihai. The Devil Troop. Wang Tianzong stood in front of the door. There was a row of buttons in front of the door like switches. Wang Tianzong reached out and gently touched the button in front of him. In the extremely low temperature, his mind became calmer and calmer. To refine the immortality potion. To wake up the Devil Troop that almost never appeared. It was all to cope with the coming chaos. If he had convinced Qin Weibai, all this might not have been needed. But Qin Weibai refused him. She hated the Wang family of Beihai. Wang Tianzong frowned. Because of Dongqing Huang too. Because of that year. He looked at the button in front of him and said to himself with no expression, "Who is Dongqing Huang to?" His finger pressed down. The button vibrated gently. There was a buzzing ultrasonic sound that normal people could not hear in the hall. The sound waves swept through the hall. The specific wave band surrounded the ice coffins closest to Wang Tianzong in a state invisible to the naked eye. It was silent. In the ice coffins, the figures that seemed to be sleeping opened their eyes one after another. They raised their stiff palms and opened the ice coffins in their hands. The figures in the ice coffins sat up with ice chips all over their bodies. Everyone looked at Wang Tianzong in silence. The scene was weird and horrifying. Wang Tianzong passed by the ice coffins in front of him. The activation password corresponding to each person sounded in the hall, steady and clear. Silence. Shadow. Frenzy. Autumn water. Amber. Wrath sea. Calm lake. Doomsday. Slaughter. Divine sword. Divine punishment. Death. Wang Tianzong's clear voice kept echoing in the hall. The Devil Troop was one of the most mysterious foundations of the Beihai force. Every soldier had to go back to sleep here after being transformed. Their strength was unparalleled, but the overly powerful force put their bodies on the verge of collapse. So most of the time, they slept at the lowest temperature. They were different from the Terracotta Army of Zhongzhou State and the Kusanagi force of East Island. Their combat effectiveness was extremely powerful, but they could not be exposed to the outside world for a long time because they could not control their power. So the Terracotta Army and the Kusanagi force became super transformed soldiers that could be awakened at any time with a password and could be reused at any time. The Devil Troop became the foundation of the Wang family of Beihai and the cruelest and most luxurious consumable. Wang Tianzong looked at the figure sitting up in the ice coffin and said the last password with a calm look. Extinction. 12 passwords. The bodies of the 12 soldiers shook at the same time. It was still silent, but everyone's eyes were focused on Wang Tianzong. The password is correct. A somewhat mechanical voice sounded. It seemed that they had slept for so long that they were still a little slow for a while. What's the matter? Please go to Snow Country. Wang Tianzong's tone was calm. A sudden clap of thunder resounded over the North Sea province. The thunder covered the entire Mount Dibbing, and the huge sound wave poured into the ground. The storm that had been brewing for a long time poured down and fluttered wildly. Huge waves rose under the stage, a formidable person, and hit Mount Dibbing. In the Devil Hall, dozens of meters underground, there was only the sound of the violent tide, except for the dull thunder. The tide was endless. The stiff and slow voice sounded again. We set off now. They were the most luxurious consumables of the Wang family of Beihai. From a moment they were awakened, they already had an unchangeable fate. The 12 people walked out of the ice coffin in turn and walked to the exit of the hall. Wang Tianzong stood behind them and bowed deeply. In the huge tide, his voice spread in the hall, calm and respectful. Chapter 319. Second update. It was drizzling and hooting. The dense rain was like a transparent silk thread filling the sky and the earth, falling down in disorder and order, soaking the whole city and the Huangpu River in the city. The river was smooth. The rain fell on the river, bringing tiny ripples all over the river. The light rain was leisurely and gentle. In the almost carefree rain curtain, the whole city was with a misty and hazy leisure. A boat was floating on the river. It was the smallest sightseeing boat on the Huangpu River. The boat was going from west to east. Someone was sitting in the bow, quietly drinking tea, looking down from a high place, the city in the rain, the river in the city, the boat on the river, and the people on the boat were quiet and beautiful, like a very simple and elegant picture in the bustling city. Through the clean and bright floor-to-ceiling window, Li Tianlan watched quietly. A woman was sitting on the sofa behind him. The woman was in her 30s. She looked ordinary but elegant. She was wearing a black professional suit. Her smile was elegant and polite, and she looked sincere and dignified. Li Tianlan stood with his back to her, looking at the rain outside the window. He seemed to be in a trance. This was the reception room on the top floor of the Flourishing Age Financial Group. Li Tianlan came here today to sign a cooperation agreement with Han Donglu on behalf of the East Emperor Palace. The woman sitting behind Li Tianlan was Han Donglu's secretary. Han Donglu was in a meeting. It was not that Han Donglu deliberately neglected Li Tianlan. It was said that the meeting started in the middle of the night and had not ended until now. Even Han Donglu's secretary came out of the conference room to receive Li Tianlan after Li Tianlan arrived. This was already a high degree of attention. "Mr. Li, the tea is getting cold," the secretary said with a chuckle. Li Tianlan waved his hand, turned back to look at the secretary, and asked, "How long does Boss Han need?" "It should be very soon." The secretary looked at her watch and said with an impeccable smile, "Boss Han has ordered the legal department to draw up the contract. You can get the investment of the Flourishing Age Fund by noon today at the latest." Li Tianlan nodded and said yes. He had communicated with everyone in the East Emperor Palace. Everyone thought that they had no reason to refuse this investment. If any force wanted to develop, money might not be the most important, but it was absolutely the most basic. The East Emperor Palace, which was known as one of the four forces of the young generation, was now too monotonous. It had no more than 10 personnel, no various departments, no personal network and intelligence system of its own, and no economic source to support the continued development of the East Emperor Palace. It was not so much a force as a small group that might go their separate ways at any time. This wasn't a problem in the past, but graduation was coming. After the final maneuver, if the East Emperor Palace could win, it would become the new free force with the first place in both academies. At that time, various departments and institutions were indispensable. 5 billion sounded like a lot, but for any new force, it was not a huge sum of money. It could only be considered as a startup fund. The reason why Li Tianlan decided to accept Han Donglu's investment was because of the golden signboard of the Flourishing Age Fund. The Flourishing Age gene and the Han family were the neutral families with the strongest capital in Zhongzhou State. As long as he got the initial investment, it meant that there would be more possibilities for him to cooperate with the Han family in the future. As long as Li Tianlan and the East Emperor Palace showed enough potential, the Han family's investment in the future would continue to increase. For the East Emperor Palace, Sufficient funds represented a guarantee for rapid development. Moreover, as long as he led the East Emperor Palace through this maneuver, with the golden signboard of the Flourishing Age Fund, he would get more investment in the future, even more than just money. The premise was that Li Tianlan was strong enough. Perhaps there were still many people who doubted Li Tianlan, who was ranked 9th on the divine list. But Li Tianlan was full of confidence. His strength was indeed not as strong as it was during the decisive battle in Tiandu, but his greater potential allowed him to have a broader future. After getting Han Donglu's investment, he didn't think that he would lose money, nor did he think that Han Donglu would lose money. He even felt that this was one of Han Donglu's most successful investments. Li Tianlan looked down at his watch. 9:50 a.m. He frowned. Just as he was about to speak, the secretary's cell phone rang. The secretary answered the phone, listened for a while, and then said yes. "Mr. Li, Boss Han has finished the meeting. He will come to meet you soon." The secretary stood up, and her smile grew softer. "Okay," Li Tianlan responded. As his eyes turned through the glass of the reception room, he had seen a group of people coming out of the conference room. This was a team of about 20 people, men and women, from young to middle-aged. Everyone's eyes flashed with excitement and solemnity. The whole team walked out of the conference room in a hurry. The calm and determined Han Donglu walked at the end. Han Xinyan, who looked quiet but was very tough, followed Han Donglu, one step behind. Another very young woman was walking side by side with Han Donglu. The two of them were talking about something calmly. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes slightly and looked at them without saying a word. That was a young woman of at most 24 or 25 years old. The moment he saw her, Li Tianlan even felt that he saw Qin Weibai in a trance. She was slightly shorter than Qin Weibai. Her charm and appearance were a little inferior. But even if she was a little inferior, she was still extremely beautiful. The same sharpness, the same delicacy, the same confidence. The same, but not the same. The woman standing next to Han Donglu was extremely arrogant. It was a kind of clear arrogance that seemed to look down on everyone. She was not cold, but because of the existence of this arrogance, she looked extremely indifferent. Indifference and arrogance were also confidence. She looked calm and walked side by side with Han Donglu. In terms of aura, she was even stronger than Han Donglu. In their sight, the woman walked out of the conference room, shook hands with Han Donglu, and then turned around. The team that walked out of the conference room first followed the woman and surrounded her to the elevator. A group of women walked past the guest room. Her figure suddenly stopped, and she turned to look at Li Tianlan in the reception room. The two looked at each other through the glass. Li Tianlan was indifferent and fearless. The woman turned around expressionlessly and continued to walk to the elevator. Her figure swayed, and her silver high-heeled shoes hit the ground. The clear sound seemed to fall on everyone's heart with sharpness. Han Xinyan walked beside the woman and sent her downstairs. Han Donglu walked into the reception room. "Who is that?" Li Tianlan asked. "Why, do you have an idea?" Han Donglu sat on the sofa with a smile and waved his hand to signal the secretary to leave. "She's hostile to me," Li Tianlan said. Although they looked at each other for a moment, he could clearly perceive the sharpness in the other's eyes. "It's normal." Han Donglu smiled and cut open a cigar. "You brought so much pressure to my fiancée, and you even dragged my sister-in-law into my car. Why should I be calm with you?" "Fiancé?" Li Tianlan's eyes flashed, and he sat opposite Han Donglu. Han Donglu handed the cigar to Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan shook his head and took out a cigarette. "She is Wang Shengxiao's fiancée and my partner this time." Han Donglu took a puff of the cigar. In the smoke, his voice was a little deep. "The first Miss Tang of the Wang family of Beihai. The future hostess of the Wang family of Beihai." Then, Li Tianlan was a little surprised. Thinking of the arrogant woman just now and Song Si, he asked, "What about Song Si? Even you can have more than one woman. Why can't Wang Shengxiao?" Tang Shi and Song Si are the two most outstanding women of the young generation of the Wang family of Beihai. In some ways, they're even more outstanding than Wang Yuetong. Han Donglu said with a smile, "Especially Tang Shi. Compared with Song Si, who only appeared 2 or 3 years ago, Tang Shi was trained as the economic helmsman of the Wang family of Beihai when she was very young. The Wang family of Beihai has been passed down for nearly 10 generations and hundreds of years. You can't imagine how big their industry is. Now, Tang Shi is in charge of all the industries. Amazing. Li Tianlan took a puff of the cigarette and said softly, "There were geniuses in the field of martial arts. There were also geniuses in the field of finance and business." Really amazing. Han Donglu nodded. In Snow Country, the Polar Ground Alliance is in civil strife. Last night, an oligarch family was completely destroyed. Snow Country is in turmoil. Tang Shi came here today to join the Flourishing Age Fund to target Snow Country's currency. What about investment? Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. If the Wang family of Beihai and the Flourishing Age Fund joined hands to attack the currency, they would have to mobilize a lot of cash. That's a different matter. Han Donglu shook his head. I can give you 5 billion at any time. It doesn't matter. The secretary left and came back. She was followed by a shrewd middle-aged man in a suit and leather shoes. The man put the folder in his hand beside Han Donglu, bent down, and said, "Boss Han, the contract has been drafted. It will take effect after you sign it." Han Donglu nodded casually, pushed the contract to Li Tianlan, and said, "This is the contract between us. Everyone in the East Emperor Palace has to sign it. 5 billion will be in place before this afternoon. Take a look. If there is no doubt, I am the first investor of the East Emperor Palace." Li Tianlan opened the folder. The contract was thick, because there were many contracts. A single one was actually 2 pages. It emphasized that the Flourishing Age Financial Group occupied 10% of the interests of the East Emperor Palace. At the same time, it emphasized the power that the Flourishing Age Financial Group had in the sphere of influence of the East Emperor Palace in the future. In addition, all of them were supplementary investments of the Flourishing Age Financial Group to the East Emperor Palace. For example, if Li Tianlan could survive the final maneuver, the Flourishing Age Financial Group would invest another 500 million. If the East Emperor Palace could win the final maneuver, the investment scale would be increased to 3 billion. What made Li Tianlan the most painful was that the F*King contract even stated that if Li Tianlan could marry Dongcheng Rushi or Wang Yuedong, the Flourishing Age Financial Group would increase the amount. Li Tianlan's mouth twitched as he read the contract. He could totally imagine the expressions of Li Beitian and the others after reading the contract. He put the contract away and said with a poker face, "No problem. The funds will be in place before this afternoon." Han Donglu said, "From now on, you are one of the investment targets of the Flourishing Age Financial Group. Within a certain range, the Flourishing Age Foundation will give you a certain degree of support, but it does not include the 6 groups in Zhongzhou State." Li Tianlan nodded. He could understand this support correctly, but aren't you afraid that the 6 groups will retaliate against you? Li Tianlan asked. After all, my identity is relatively sensitive. If the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City know that you invest in the East Emperor Palace, if they know, they know. Han Donglu said blandly, "So what? What I invest in now are all forces that have the hope of becoming an invincible realm expert in the future. It's a normal business behavior. The money is mine, and I'm willing to give it to you. It's not someone else's turn to talk nonsense." "They're not just talking nonsense," Li Tianlan said blandly. "You don't understand," Han Donglu said calmly. "Although the Han family has no invincible realm expert now, the power we have is not something that anyone can ignore. The Han family can rise, but the most difficult part was in the first few years. At that time, I had funds and means but not enough power. I was like a child walking downtown with gold in his arms. At that time, there were indeed people who wanted to attack the Han family." "What did you do?" Li Tianlan asked. "Me?" A fierce look flashed in Han Donglu's eyes. "I directly set off a financial storm inside Zhongzhou State, from Hong Kong to Huading. That was the battle for the Han family to gain a foothold in Zhongzhou State. The Wang family of Beihai, the giant group, and ourselves all suffered heavy losses. But since then, there have been fewer people who dare to attack us. After that, the Han family opened the way with money and invested in the 6 groups. After so many years, I have friends in the 6 groups. When I need it, I can make my voice heard in the 6 groups at the same time. This is my power. I throw my money out. This power never exists, but it is everywhere, just like the 7th group. Li Tianlan said blandly. A neutral group? There's no such saying. Han Donglu shook his head with a smile. But the Han family really doesn't have to succumb to anyone's will unless we are willing. Li Tianlan nodded. Absolute wealth could make one fearless indeed. The Han family did not have an invincible realm expert, but they had money. If Han Donglu really went crazy and threw hundreds of billions of yuan to buy a person's life, not to mention ordinary killers, most invincible realm experts would be willing to work for Han Donglu for the sake of this huge amount of wealth and take that person's head back. So, Li Tianlan patted the folder on the table. Happy cooperation, he said. Happy cooperation. Han Donglu reached out and shook hands with Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan took the folder and walked to the window. The rain outside the window was getting heavier. Standing at a height of 100 floors and looking down, Li Tianlan could still see everything on the river clearly. The ripples on the river continued to spread, layer upon layer. The small boat on the river was floating quietly. It was still raining. The people on the boat were still drinking tea. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes. His heart gradually calmed down. After signing this contract, the East Emperor Palace would have a real start after the maneuver was over. The Li family would also have a real start. Although the investment is a little less, Li Tianlan said, but I still want to thank you, Boss Han. Han Donglu smiled and said calmly, it's already a lot. I don't want to lose money in vain. After the maneuver is over, I may continue to invest more. You will. Li Tianlan looked at the rain outside the window and said softly. Han Donglu smiled and said nothing. Li Tianlan would not know what the 1.5 billion boss Han, who kept saying that he did not want to lose money in vain, gave him. The Flourishing Age Fund did invest in the East Emperor Palace, Phantom Palace, 3000 World, and Gile Mountain. But what Li Tianlan did not know was that the 3 billion Han Donglu invested in 3000 World had given out less than 1 billion so far. Li Tianlan had an investment of 1.5 billion. What he got was 1.5 billion. 3000 World had an investment of 3 billion, but it had received less than 1 billion so far. 3 billion was a lot, but there was an essential difference between installment investment and one-time investment. It's good that you have confidence. Han Donglu smiled and patted Li Tianlan on the shoulder. It's good to be confident, but I'll give you a piece of advice. Don't look down on Wang Shengxiao and Guhan's Han, and don't look down on Jiang Shangyu. The boat in the river had drifted to the opposite side of the Flourishing Age building. Li Tianlan shook his head and said, I won't look down on anyone. Han Donglu nodded and looked at Li Tianlan. He suddenly said, Are you under a lot of pressure? I'm fine. Although he felt that Han Donglu's attitude was a little strange, Li Tianlan remained calm. Han Donglu looked at Li Tianlan quietly. He looked at Li Tianlan, who was calm and didn't even show any emotion. He didn't know Li Tianlan very well, but after several meetings, he could vaguely feel the depression in his heart. As the inheritor of the Li family, there was only one way in his life. Now, he had passed the starting point. In front of him was the Wang family of Beihai, the heir of Kunlun City. After that, there might be the entire Wang family of Beihai, the entire Kunlun City, the Jiang family of South America, and more enemies. Such a life? Have you ever been happy? Han Donglu suddenly asked a meaningless question. Li Tianlan was silent for a long time. I have been happy, he said. Han Donglu smiled and pointed out the window. He said meaningfully, when one day you can stand here justifiably, you'll be really happy. He turned and walked to the door of the reception area. Li Tianlan stood there and looked out the window. It was close to the highest point of Huading. Standing here and looking at the outside world, he was looking down and overlooking it. In the misty rain, the whole world seemed to be under his feet. Boss Han! Li Tianlan suddenly let out a cry. Han Donglu turned around in confusion. How about lending you another piece of glass? Li Tianlan reached out and gently swiped in front of the floor-to-ceiling window. Without a sound, the entire glass shattered. The sword intent rose quietly and returned to nothingness with the glass fragments. Because there was no shelter in the sky hundreds of meters above, the cold wind and rain poured into the reception area instantly. Li Tianlan just stared at the boat in the river. He took a step forward and jumped directly from the building of Huuding, which was even higher than the Oriental Pearl Tower. Han Xinyan, who had just walked into the conference room, exclaimed subconsciously. Li Tianlan's body rose into the air. It was not falling. It was shooting. The sky was gloomy, and the wind and rain were dark. Li Tianlan's body was like a sharp sword, tearing the whistling wind. He jumped down from a sky hundreds of meters above and went straight to the Huangpu River below. In the wind and rain, his white figure was like a flash of flowing light, with suppressed madness to the extreme. There was a boat on the Huangpu River. The tea drinker at the bow of the boat raised his head and looked at the sky. A white shadow appeared in the sky, bringing with it a downpour of wind and rain as it stepped onto the bow of the ship. Bang! Amidst the dull sound, the entire boat suddenly shook violently. At the same time, the figure drinking tea at the bow also shook. The boat swayed, but there were no waves at the bottom. The ripples continued to spread. All the waves seemed to be suppressed by the figure drinking tea at the bow. His face turned pale, and a bitter smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. This appearance is really cool. He looked at Li Tianlan, who was falling from the sky, and said lightly. Li Tianlan stood at the bow of the boat and said lightly, "How did you know I would be in the Shengshi building? Do you believe that I guessed it?" Jiang Shangyu, who was drinking tea alone on the boat, looked at Li Tianlan with a smile. A trace of blood came out of the corner of his mouth. Boom! In an instant, with the boat as the center, the water within 100 meters of the Huangpu River suddenly boiled. A white wave rushed up to the sky almost violently, as if to overturn the whole river. Only the boat was still floating quietly. Jiang Shanyu on the boat picked up the teapot. The rain falling on the river gradually poured into the teapot. He flicked his fingers and lit the fire. The rain and the tea gradually became boiling hot. Jiang Shangyu boiled the river. "Drink tea." Jiang Shangyu, who came and went like a ghost, poured a cup of tea for Li Tianlan and said with a smile, "We should have talked a long time ago. This place is just right." Chapter 320. Blood dripped down from the corner of Jiang Shangyu's mouth and fell on his arm. Jiang Shangyu's smile was calm and peaceful. At that moment, Li Tianlan jumped down from the sky and landed on the deck. In fact, it was the second fight between Li Tianlan and Jiang Shangyu after 3 years. In other words, it was the first time in an inevitable fight. Jiang Shangyu wanted to cooperate with Li Tianlan. Since it was cooperation, he had to know Li Tianlan's strength. Li Tianlan also showed him his strength. Li Tianlan jumped in the air above 100 meters. With the help of the fierce impact, Li Tianlan seriously injured Jiang Shangyu the moment he landed. Jiang Shangyu originally wanted to suppress this violent force, but at the moment he attacked, he did not feel the sword intent. All he could feel was power, abundant, surging, and violent power that could completely crush everything. The absolute power directly broke through his suppression, went deep into the water, and finally exploded on the surface of the water. The calm water within a radius of 100 meters suddenly rose into the sky. The white waves rushed to the sky dozens of meters high. Before one wave subsided, another wave rose, covering the sky and the sun, like fireworks rising on the river. The injury went deep into the heart. Jiang Shangyu looked calm, and there was even some joy in his eyes. Li Tianlan was indeed a worthy target for cooperation. Li Tianlan walked to Jiang Shangyu, sat down, and put aside the clean folder in his hand. Jiang Shangyu handed him a cup of tea. Li Tianlan drank it up. The tea was slightly bitter. "Say it." Li Tianlan didn't want to stay any longer. Jiang Shangyu didn't want him to stay any longer. He rubbed his chest and said with a bitter smile, You hit me hard enough. You asked for it, Li Tianlan said indifferently. Jiang Shangyu smiled and said calmly, I can know that you are in the Flourishing Age building. Wang Xingxiao and Gu Hanzhan must have received the news. I can't hide it, Li Tianlan said. He didn't want to hide it. The investment from the Flourishing Age Fund was supposed to be used in the shortest time to enhance his strength. At least in Li Tianlan's view, the news of the Flourishing Age Fund investing in East Emperor Palace was far less confidential than his meeting with Jiang Shangyu today. That was why he jumped down from the sky in such a high-profile manner and seriously injured Jiang Shangyu in an instant. So, even if the news was leaked, Jiang Shangyu had a serious injury as a reason. How confident are you in the final maneuver? Jiang Shangyu filled Li Tianlan's cup with tea again and asked softly, I will win. Li Tianlan turned the teacup in his hand and said in a flat tone. He didn't say how confident he was, but these 3 simple words completely showed his absolute confidence. Jiang Shangyu narrowed his eyes. My intuition tells me that I should trust you. Jiang Shangyu looked at Li Tianlan for a while and then smiled. But it's not a bad thing to know more about the enemy. He reached into his arms, took out a flash drive, and put it in front of Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan glanced at him. Some videos of Wang Xingxiao, Gu Hanhan, and Song Ci in the past 3 years. Jiang Shangyu pointed at the flash drive. This is very valuable information. I hope you can see something. Wang Xingxiao, Li Tianlan said, seeming a little surprised. Li Tianlan was not surprised that Jiang Shangyu had information about Gu Hanzhan. After all, the Jiang family was a wealthy family. In recent years, when they tried to unite with the Wang family of Beihai by marriage, they did not completely refuse Kunlun City's olive branch. Now Gu Hanzhan entered the 3000 world, which represented further contact between the Jiang family and Kunlun City. It was not difficult for the Jiang family to get information about Gu Hanzhan, but Wang Xingxiao was different. In the past 3 years, Wang Xingxiao had rarely been active in Zhongzhou State. Most of the time, he was wandering around the world or staying in Beihai Province. Few people could see his moves, let alone battle videos. Li Tianlan had every reason to believe that Wang Xingxiao's battle videos could be sold at a sky-high price to any force. This is not the information the Jiang family got. Jiang Shangyu took a deep look at Li Tianlan. It was given to me by military counselor. Military counselor? Li Tianlan suddenly raised his eyebrows. Which military counselor? How many military counselors can there be in the dark world? Jiang Shangyu said softly, Naturally, it's the second supermaster of Samsara Palace. Samsara Palace, Jiang family. No, it should be Jiang Shangyu of Samsara Palace. Li Tianlan took a sip of tea silently. Until this moment, he suddenly realized that since he returned to the present, he had not had any form of contact with Samsara Palace. He returned to East Emperor Palace. But Bamboo Forest and Volcano of East Emperor Palace had left, and only Yu Donglai guarded the headquarters of East Emperor Palace. Military Counselor Saint did not appear. Qin Weibai seemed to have completely cut off contact with him. Li Tianlan knew this, but he instinctively did not want to think more about it. But when he saw Jiang Shangyu take out the USB, he realized that he was not the only one avoiding Samsara Palace. All the forces of Samsara Palace now seemed to be carefully avoiding him. So the other party would rather give him this invaluable battle information through Jiang Shangyu. What did military counselor say? Li Tianlan asked slowly. He didn't say anything. He just hoped that I could give you the USB. Jiang Shangyu shook his head. Li Tianlan was silent. Samsara Palace undoubtedly attached great importance to the Jiang family. Otherwise, they would not have found out the secret that Jiang Shangyu had the heavenly king heart. Jiang Shangyu had the heavenly king heart, which was equivalent to having a ticket to the gate of the invincible realm. If this secret had been exposed in the beginning, it might have been okay. But the Jiang family had always kept this secret. They tried to get close to the Wang family of Beihai. They tried to get close to Kunlun City. But this secret had never been exposed. Obviously, the father and son of the Jiang family had a big plan. In particular, Jiang Shangyu had been with Gu Hanzhan. Once the news of his hidden strength was exposed, it was enough to cause extreme vigilance in Kunlun City. Gu Hanzhan also had the Heavenly King heart, but Jiang Shangyu also had the exquisite bone when he had the Heavenly King heart. His aptitude was even slightly better than Gu Hanzhan's. Why was he willing to submit to Gu Hanzhan? Such a person followed Gu Hanzhan firmly. Once he grew up, the threat to Kunlun City would be even greater than that of Li Tianlan and Wang Shengxiao. Gu Xingyin would never let go of this threat. Even if Jiang Shangyu was really loyal, Kunlun City might not really believe it. So Jiang Shangyu had a reason to cooperate with Li Tianlan from the beginning. Li Tianlan did not doubt this. But he also did not think that Jiang Shangyu had no other choice. He picked up the USB flash drive. Why don't you give this to the Wang family of Beihai? Li Tianlan looked into Jiang Shangyu's eyes. Kunlun City was developing extremely fast, but its foundation was slightly poor. At present, its foundation was not completely stable. So Gu Xingyin would be suspicious and would not let go of any threat. But the Wang family of Beihai was different. With the foundation of the Wang family of Beihai, it could completely accommodate Jiang Shangyu's Heavenly King heart. If Jiang Shangyu secretly approached Wang Shengxiao, the Wang family of Beihai would not completely refuse, even if it was not very welcome. Jiang Shangyu looked into Li Tianlan's eyes. There was a sneer at the corner of his mouth. Does it make sense? He asked, what can I get if I give it to the Wang family of Beihai? Even if I bring down Kunlun City, only the Wang family of Beihai will benefit. Maybe I will also get benefits, but it is just a bone that the Wang family of Beihai throws to me. The bone may be big and fragrant, but a bone is a bone. He leaned forward and stared at Li Tianlan. His pale face was flushed with excitement and paranoia. I'm not a dog. Why can't I eat meat? Yes, why? Li Tianlan asked faintly. Jiang Shangyu relaxed his body and leaned back. So I will choose you. Although it is not a good choice, it is the only choice. I chose the Wang family of Beihai, and it will only make me desperate in the end. But you are different. You have great potential, but your foundation is weak. If we cooperate and take down Kunlun City, at least I will have a chance to compete with you. Do you think the Samsara Palace can't see this? That's why military counselor came to me. Because the Samsara Palace knows that I can only cooperate with you now. And he didn't give this USB to you through others, such as the Dongchang clan or Sai City, which also means that the Samsara Palace doesn't want our cooperation to be known by anyone else. The rain on the river poured into the teapot. The rain was boiling in the flame, and the fragrance of tea was overflowing. Jiang Shangyu smiled. He said softly, it's good for me to hide in the dark. Li Tianlan lit a cigarette and took a deep breath. Tell me about the cooperation. He said, I can provide you with some internal information about Kunlun City. I can help you solve something inconvenient for you to show up while ensuring my own safety. What you need to do is very simple. Help me kill Gu Hanzhan, Jiang Shangyu said with a smile. Fair enough. Li Tianlan was expressionless. It's fair enough. When Jiang Shangyu spoke, his eyes were very persistent and firm. That was a look that Li Tianlan was very familiar with. When he met Jiang Shangyu for the first time in East Island 3 years ago, he saw the persistence in his eyes. That was unwillingness. He didn't want to succumb to anyone. Or, in other words, it was ambition. He would not succumb to Gu Hanzhan. Similarly, Li Tianlan also knew that he would not succumb to him. Just like how Li Tianlan felt when he met Jiang Shangyu for the first time. They would not be friends. But as long as Kunlun City still existed and Gu Hanzhan was still alive, their cooperation could be completely trusted. Common interests were more reliable than any friendship. That's it. Li Tianlan nodded and was ready to leave. It was really not suitable for the two of them to stay together for too long, even if he seriously injured Jiang Shangyu. By the way, I want to remind you of one thing. Jiang Shangyu said lightly, be careful. Don't be too optimistic about your prospects. Even if you can win the final maneuver, it doesn't mean anything. Wang Tianzong and Gu Hanzhan will be there in person during the maneuver. If you win, do you think those two will directly kill you? Li Tianlan's movements paused. Senior Li's current state is very dangerous, but it's not unsolvable. Jiang Shangyu continued. Li Tianlan raised his head with a silent expression and glanced at Jiang Shangyu. What do you want to say? Do you know the Devil Troop? Jiang Shangyu hesitated and decided to tell Li Tianlan the news. The Devil Troop. Li Tianlan's pupils contracted imperceptibly. He had heard Bai Yuming mention this name once. It was said that Song Ci was related to the Devil Troop. But what was the Devil Troop? Whether it really existed or not, let alone Bai Yuming, perhaps even some core figures of the Wang family of Beihai were not very clear. I've heard of it. Li Tianlan nodded slowly. I've heard a legend. Jiang Shangyu said softly. The Devil Troop does exist. Under normal circumstances, do you believe that 6 experts of the Fire-Flaming Realm and the Thunder-Shocking Realm can kill an invincible realm expert? His voice was a little cold. This is the Devil Troop of the Wang family of Beihai. Li Tianlan didn't overreact. He just frowned slightly. 6 experts of the Fire-Flaming Realm. 6 experts of the Thunder-Shocking Realm. An invincible realm expert could be besieged to death, but under normal circumstances, it was impossible for this lineup to kill an invincible realm expert. If this legend is true, they are definitely not ordinary experts of the Fire-Flaming Realm and the Thunder-Shocking Realm. Li Tianlan said, first of all, their combat effectiveness will be far beyond their realm. Second, their defensive power has at least reached the level where they can withstand the attack of an invincible realm expert. At least they can withstand one attack of an invincible realm expert. Then there is a strong vitality and recovery ability. This is not enough. Jiang Shangyu's face was a little gloomy. This can only let them get close to an invincible realm expert at most. It's really not enough. Li Tianlan nodded. So the key to the main problem is the attack power of the Devil Troop. The attack power they burst out in an instant is absolutely beyond imagination. No matter how strong they are only in the Fire-Flaming Realm and the Thunder-Shocking Realm, unless all of them have the wind and thunder veins. Jiang Shangyu shook his head and seemed to disagree. Without the wind and thunder veins, it's not impossible for them to withstand more powerful power, but the price is a little high. Li Tianlan said, if their power all breaks through the limit of what they can bear, 12 people can still kill an invincible realm expert. Jiang Shangyu was suddenly shocked. If their power all breaks through the limit of what they can bear, that means they can only fight one battle at most. If they go all out, they can only hit one blow. Li Tianlan said, but that blow is far beyond the power of the Thunder-Shocking Realm and the Fire-Flaming Realm, and such a blow will destroy their own bodies first. To kill the enemy, first kill yourself. Li Tianlan's tone became more and more flat. So, they are probably consumables. This should be the nature of the Devil Troop. But the Wang family of Beihai can't have a lot of such consumables. They can't have so many resources. Even if they don't have a lot, it should be enough to deal with Senior Li. Jiang Shangyu said flatly. Is Wang Tianzong willing? Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes. For such a wealthy family, how can they not be willing? The key is whether Wang Tianzong feels threatened or not. Jiang Shangyu said, in fact, they are still too hesitant. If I were Gu Xingyun or Wang Tianzong, or Gu Xingyun and Wang Tianzong were my father, I would not hesitate to gather my strength and completely destroy the Li family. Even if I have to pay a high price, it is worth it. Your father is not Wang Tianzong or Gu Xingyun. Li Tianlan said calmly. Yes. Jiang Shangyu laughed. So you're really lucky. Li Tianlan stood up. What's your plan? Jiang Shangyu asked. I'm going to Linen. Li Tianlan said. I'm going now. Be careful. Jiang Shangyu said. At least now you are dead, which is not good for me. If you can survive the final maneuver. He poured a cup of tea in front of himself and Li Tianlan and said with a smile, then from now on, Zhongzhou State will be the world of Yumi and Wang Shengshao. He stood up with the teacup and handed a cup of tea to Li Tianlan. Tea instead of wine. A toast to our country in the future. Situ Tsangyue was enjoying the snow. The snow in Mount Taibai remained unchanged all the year round. Whether it was howling with the wind or standing still with the wind, The continuous mountains were always pure white. A pure mountain, a pure city. It was so pure that there was no sorrow or joy. Without sorrow or joy, it was ruthlessness. Therefore, Sai City was the city of assassins. Situ Tsanyue liked it here. She liked to see the snow spread from her feet to thousands of miles away. It was white as if the end of the world was covered in snow, boundless and without any filth. Therefore, she rarely went down the mountain. With her, Sai City was the real Sai City. The wind and snow swirled above Mount Taibai, whistling and gathering like a tornado. Situ Tsanyue sat in front of the Taibai temple of Sai City, watching the snow gathered and blown away by the wind. Her eyes were tranquil and gentle. Tribulation, who had returned to Mount Taibai, came over from the other side. He was holding a mobile phone that looked a little old in the outside world. In the cold wind, he sat down beside Situ Tsanyue, handed the mobile phone to her, and whispered a text message from Drifting Cloud. 3 years ago, after tribulation broke through to the invincible realm, the high-level officials of Zhongzhou State already had the voice to give Sai City greater responsibility. Greater responsibility meant greater power. Sai City now had 2 invincible realm experts and a murderous weapon. No one would think that they could not afford these. But such a voice was just a voice now, and it had not become a reality for the time being. Gu Xingyun reformed the Special Warfare System. Now it had been 3 years, but the Southeast Special Warfare Headquarters was still a pilot and had not been promoted throughout Zhongzhou State. This was also the best reason for Kunlun City to restrict Sai City. The reform was still groping, so it was not suitable to give Sai City a clear position. In the past 3 years, since tribulation came back from Sai City, only 2 people went out. They were Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud, known as the Double Walls of Sai City. Cool Breeze was now the director of the political department of the Sky Academy. Drifting Cloud entered Yuzhou and served as the first deputy director of the Yuzhou Special Operations Bureau. These 2 now represented all the forces of Sai City outside the northeast of Zhongzhou State. Situ Tsanyue took the mobile phone from tribulation. The screen of the mobile phone was open, and there was only one sentence on it. Wang Tianzong has arrived in Kunlun City. Situ Tsanyue looked at the mobile phone with deep eyes. In the past 2 months, this is the second time Wang Tianzong has gone to Kunlun City. Tribulation said in a flat tone. Situ Tsanyue nodded and sighed. The first time was to test Kunlun City's determination and to release its attitude. The second time, there is no doubt that the cooperation has been confirmed. Tribulation's tone was cold. Situ Tsanyue returned the mobile phone to Tribulation. There was a moment of silence. Do you think they've forgotten about me? In the silent wind and snow, Situ Tsanyue suddenly asked. Tribulation didn't speak, thinking that it was not that the world had forgotten Sai City, but that Sai City had never been remembered. Since the hidden god of Zhongzhou State in Sai City was hidden from the world, why should he be remembered? The hidden god had never been remembered. The relationship between the hidden god and the Li family naturally didn't need to be cared about, even if Li Tianlan was now the young governor of Sai City. They are afraid. Situ Tsanyue continued. The current Tianlan makes them afraid. Tianlan is now the young governor of Sai City. Tribulation said blandly, we should do something. I'll go, Situ Tsanyue said. Tribulation was suddenly shocked. He turned his head and looked at his sister seriously. Are you going hooting? No, it's Lin and... Situ Tsanyue's tone was as calm as water. As long as Senior Li is still there, Tianlan will be fine. Wang Tianzong doesn't have to enter Kunlun City twice just to deal with Tianlan. They want to kill Senior Li. Perhaps Li Tianlan was so powerful that Wang Tianzong and Gu Xingyun felt threatened. But a threat was just a threat. As long as Li Honghe was killed, the threat of Li Tianlan could be wiped out at will. So she wanted to protect Li Tianlan. She had to protect Li Honghe first. That was the order that must not be messed up. Situ Tsanyue reached out her hand. Her hand was slender and white. A dark purple ring was put on her hand. The ring flickered gently and emitted a strange light in the snow. Situ Tsanyue took off the ring and placed it in her palm. The light of the ring grew stronger. The sword intent rose around Situ Sanyue. There was sword energy in the endless wind and snow, so it was no longer pure. Heartless people had more weapons in their hands, so they had emotions. The purple ring turned into a dark purple gun. The gun was not big. In terms of length, it looked like an enlarged version of a pistol. But the caliber of the pistol was incredibly large, so the whole gun looked a little irregular. The huge caliber was like a handgun. It was one of the 12 murderous weapons in the Dark World. Sunset. When a murderous weapon could become a gun, it meant that it could completely pour out all its energy. In the field of murderous weapons, it was called energy storage. Sunset ranked in the middle of the 12 murderous weapons, and its power was not very outstanding. But Sunset was the murderous weapon that accumulated energy the fastest among the 12 murderous weapons. Sunset roared in North America 3 years ago. 3 years were enough for Sunset to pour out its artillery fire again. Situ Sanyue looked at Sunset in her palm. A trace of determination suddenly flashed in her beautiful eyes. I don't show up, but they can't forget me. Situ Sanyue said, I don't fight, but it doesn't mean that I won't fight. She stood up. The handgun in her hand turned into a long sword shining with purple light under the sword intent. Then it turned into a ring. Situ Sanyue walked down the steps of Changbai Palace, turned around, and looked at the 2 words Changbai hanging high on the plaque in front of the palace. They knew each other until their hair turned white. In this ruthless city, the 2 words Changbai were the only deep affection. Ruthlessness was actually good, but Situ Sanyue didn't like it. She could fight for nothing and give up everything. But the Wang family of Beihai moved against the Leaf family. Kunlun City moved against the Leaf family. People in the world moved against the Leaf family. She would never agree. Situ Sanyue glanced at Tribulation and suddenly asked, How long will it take for Qin Weibai? Tribulation thought for a moment, shook his head, and said, I haven't contacted her for a while. At least a month. I can give her a month. Situ Sanyue said, I'll go to Linen now. She turned around and went down the mountain. In the wind and snow, her figure went all the way forward, becoming smaller and smaller. Lonely mountain, lonely snow. Her figure disappeared between the mountain and snow. Chapter 321. Bluffing had never worked in the Dark World. Therefore, Qin Weibai never made empty threats. She would not go to dangerous places if she was not sure that she could escape unscathed. Mount Dibbing of the Wang family of Beihai was a dangerous place. The existence of deity gave Qin Weibai the confidence to escape unscathed. She said that deity was in Beihai province. Deity was in Beihai province, less than 50 kilometers away from Mount Dibbing. This was the suburb of Shenzhou City. It was a small but modern town with a wide view and excellent road conditions. It was also outside the core warning range of the Wang family of Beihai. A high-powered car was enough for deity to rush to Mount Dibbing in the shortest time to deal with all accidents. Deity waited quietly in this small town. He held a signal receiver in his hand, from night to late night, and then to early morning. The red light, representing crisis on the signal receiver, had been quiet. It was not until it was close to noon that the signal receiver's green light flashed. That was the signal that Qin Weibai had returned safely. Seeing this scene, deity looked calm. He crushed the signal receiver with a little force in his palm. Then he stood up and left the only hotel in the town. There was a black off-road vehicle parked in front of the hotel. Deity got into the car alone, left the suburb of Shenzhou City along the road, and headed west. About 200 kilometers to the west of Shenzhou City was Fuxing Port, the largest port city in Beihai Province, and one of the largest port cities in the north of Zhengzhou State. In the Dark World, Fuxing Port was the only blind spot of the Wang family of Beihai in Beihai Province. All kinds of people took root and sprouted here. Some superpowers and lone killers often used this place as one of their transit stations. Although the Wang family of Beihai had invested a lot of power here, it was still difficult for them to control everything in this city with great mobility. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Deity's car drove into Fushing Port and finally entered a villa area with a sea view. Deity got out of the car and walked into the villa hall. It was still raining in Beihai province, and the sky was gloomy. The curtains were drawn in the villa hall, and the lights were not on. A group of men in black sat quietly in the dim environment, motionless like dead things. A corner of the curtain beside the French windows in the hall was opened. A little light came in. Qin Weibai stood quietly in the narrow corner, bathed in the only light in the hall. God closed the door. Almost all the men in black in the hall stood up at the same time and bowed slightly to God. Deity was dressed in casual clothes and had an ordinary appearance, but in the almost pitch-black hall, there was an unparalleled sense of reality. It was as if no matter how dark the surroundings were, people would be able to see all of his movements immediately. Qin Weibai turned around and said in a clear and melodious tone, "Thank you for your protection, Your Highness." Deity shook his head, looked at Qin Weibai, and asked, "Has Wang Tianzong left Mount Dibing? We can be sure that he has arrived at Kunlun City." Qin Weibai said calmly. Deity was silent. The group of black-clothed men in the hall were silent as well. The atmosphere suddenly became somewhat oppressive. Qin Weibai turned around again and looked at the gloomy and scattered rain outside the window. The rain continued to fall, and the entire North Sea province was damp and gloomy. In the darkness, Deity's voice finally sounded. Wang Tianzong is no longer on Mount Dibing. He looked at the man in black in front of him. There were a total of 10 black-clothed men lined up neatly in the hall. The 10 black-clothed men bowed at the same time and said in a calm and hoarse voice, "We are willing to die for Your Highness." The muscles on Deity's face twitched slightly. He looked at Qin Weibai with cold eyes. Qin Weibai did not look back and said calmly, "Saint is already in Mount Dibing. Military counselor will meet him in 2 hours. General and Duke will also enter Mount Dibing before dark to cooperate with you." Saint, military counselor, general, and Duke. Among the 12 supermasters of Samsara, they were the top 4 supermasters. Especially Saint and military counselor, they were the top combat capability under the invincible realm. When the two of them stood together, they were basically equivalent to an ordinary invincible realm expert. Deity still did not speak. He just looked at the 10 black-clothed men standing in front of him silently. 10 people. In the sequence of the purgatory of Heaven Capital, this was also a rare backbone force. Any one of them had at least a realm above the stabilization phase of the thunder-shocking realm. And the most important thing was that they were all battle-hardened and had a tacit understanding with each other. They were 10 individuals, but at the critical moment, they could also become a whole. Even if he had enough psychological preparation before, when it came to the critical moment, Deity was still a little reluctant. "This is a necessary sacrifice," Qin Weibai said. "Since we are targeting Wang Tianzong, we must use enough power to target some trump cards that are enough to turn the tables for him. And now, this is also a rare opportunity. We are willing to die for Your Highness." The 10 black-clothed men bowed again and said in unison. Deity took a deep breath, glanced at them, and said, "Get ready. Tonight, someone will pick you up to the core area of Mount Dibing, and then act according to the plan." The 10 black-clothed men of the thunder-shocking realm responded at the same time. Deity walked in the darkness. With just one step, his figure had already arrived in front of Qin Weibai. In the faint light, Qin Weibai's profile was exquisite and perfect, like a dream or a fantasy. Deity looked at her attentively and suddenly said, "Boss Qin, until now, do you still want to tell me that Samsara Palace's move is to replace the Polar Ground Alliance and make Snow Country your own foundation? Otherwise?" Qin Weibai's voice was calm and indifferent. "That's why I want to ask you." Deity narrowed his eyes. "In the past 3 years, Samsara Palace has provoked a chaotic war in the whole dark world. So far, you have suffered heavy losses. Plotting against Snow Country? 3 years ago, I believed what you said. But now, I don't think Samsara Palace has the possibility of winning. You are against the whole world, which has gone beyond the scope of our original cooperation." Qin Weibai looked out of the window, without saying a word. What I don't understand most is that your main energy seems to be not on Snow Country at all, but on the Wong family of Beihai. Why? Deity continued. Two experts at the peak of the invincible realm deserve respect, even if one of them is in a special state. Qin Weibai said, whether in Snow Country or in any other situation, the hidden expert of the Wong family of Beihai has the strength to turn the tables. Now, while Wang Tianzong is not here, we weaken the combat capability of the other expert at the peak of the invincible realm. What's incomprehensible about that? What about you? Deity said in a playful tone. Samsara Palace is now digging its own grave. Even if this time it weakens the Wong family of Beihai, how are you going to clean up the mess in Snow Country? Everything is expected, Qin Weibai said softly. We have our own way. Your Highness only needs to stop the Wong family of Beihai and Kunlun City. There was an imperceptible killing intent in Deity's twinkling eyes. He quietly turned his eyes to look out of the window, and the killing intent in his eyes became more and more obvious. From the beginning, he did not fully believe in Samsara Palace's plot against Snow Country. In the past 3 years, he saw every step of Samsara Palace, but he remained silent. He didn't care what Samsara Palace wanted, because it had nothing to do with him. According to the original agreement, the two sides cooperated. What the Purgatory of Heaven Capital had to do was to stop the Wong family of Beihai and Kunlun City, so that Samsara Palace could get the foundation of Snow Country. The foundation of Snow Country was there. It didn't matter to Deity whether Samsara Palace could get it or not. What he cared about was the benefits he got from this cooperation. For example, in the new Tianan province between Annan State and Zhongzhou State, the Purgatory of Heaven Capital gradually occupied half of the territory, which would be an excellent springboard for the Purgatory of Heaven Capital to enter Zhongzhou State in the future. Another example was that this time, when Wang Tianzong was not there, the Purgatory of Heaven Capital and Samsara Palace sent experts to sneak into Mount Dibbing to target the peak invincible realm expert of the Wang family of Beihai, who had never appeared. Any weakening of the Wang family of Beihai was also beneficial to him. So in the past 3 years, although the situation was getting more and more chaotic, Samsara Palace and the Purgatory of Heaven Capital had been cooperating. Deity was even happy to see the current situation. So Deity didn't care what Samsara Palace did. As long as what Qin Weibai was doing was beneficial to the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, he would not refuse. If they could really get the foundation of Samsara Palace, the Purgatory of Heaven Capital would naturally continue to cooperate with Samsara Palace to attack the Wang family of Beihai. If Samsara Palace was digging its own grave, Deity didn't mind taking action at the most critical time to send them off. He didn't like Samsara Palace or Qin Weibai. If they could disappear from this world, Deity would be very happy. Deity also knew that Qin Weibai wouldn't like him and the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. But because of Li Tianlan, he believed that Samsara Palace would never cheat him. After all, no matter what would happen in the future, at least for now, the existence of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital was beneficial to Li Tianlan. Deity turned to look at the dark hall behind him, his eyes deep. The 10 thunder-shocking realm experts of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital were still sitting, motionless. They and the 4 supermasters of Samsara were the main force to weaken the peak invincible realm expert on Mount Dibbing. He didn't know how many of these people would come back alive. He just hoped that they could be, as Qin Weibai said, that the sacrifice was worth it. Wang Tianzong went to Kunlun City. Next, they may go to Lin and right away. Qin Weibai suddenly said. Her voice was light, without any emotion. But the atmosphere in the hall suddenly changed. Deity became more and more silent. The breathing of the 10 thunder-shocking realm experts sitting in the hall, which had been calm all the time, suddenly stopped. There was a long silence. There seemed to be a gust of wind with gloomy, killing intent in the hall. I'm going back to East Island, Deity said slowly. What's your plan? Qin Weibai didn't speak. Her eyes were a little dazed. Standing in her position, she could see the blue sea ahead through the window. To the east was Mount Dibbing, to the north was Snow Country, and to the south was East Island. Down the sea, it was Zhongzhou State. Different directions, different roads, and different results. She remembered a piece of information she received a few hours ago. Li Tianlan went to Linen. Qin Weibai's heart, which was as calm as stagnant water, began to palpitate for no reason. Her thoughts were surging like a tide, and in a flash, they became huge waves. She knew that she should go north at this time. On Mount Dibbing, there would be a result after tonight. Next, Snow Country was the real top priority. And 3 years ago in Heaven Capital, she had sworn that she would never set foot on Zhongzhou State for the rest of her life. But now, looking at the sea in front of her, all her emotions suddenly fell into a state of almost losing control. That man was on the other side of the sea at this time. She would go north, because she could see the result of going north. But the endless thoughts were like a wild wolf all over, devouring all her reason. She wanted to cross the sea in front of her. Take a look at him. One last look. Qin Weibai bit her lip gently. Her perfect and delicate face was pale, as if transparent. Chapter 322. When Lin Fengting walked out of Huoding International Airport, the rain over Huoding had stopped, and the dark clouds were gone. The setting sun burned the last of its light, illuminating the horizon with a fiery red and gorgeous color. Lin Yuxian followed his father out of the airport in a hurry and said subconsciously, "Dad, would you like to eat something first?" "No need." Lin Fengting shook his head. Perhaps because he came to Huoding, his heart relaxed a little, and a smile appeared on his face. "Let's go directly to Linen. At that time, ask your grandpa Li to cook something delicious for you. His cooking skills are very good. When I was a child, my favorite food was the side dishes he made." When I was a child, Lin Yuxian muttered to himself and repeated the sentence. Lin Fengting's expression was a little complicated, and he whispered, "When I was a child, the Wang family of Beihai, the Li family, and the Lin clan had a good relationship, and they had frequent contact with each other. At that time, I was about 16 or 17 years old. I, Tianzong, and Quanta learned swordsmanship with Senior Li for 2 years. Earlier, it was Senior Wang of the Wang family of Beihai who laid the foundation for the 4 of us. Later, the 4 of us were in Switzerland and taught by your grandfather for a few years. The martial arts of the Wang family of Beihai and the Lin clan are different. Even the 24 moves of sword of the Li family are different from those of the Lin clan. At that time, in addition to strengthening the feelings of our younger generation, the 3 old people's approach was to cultivate the strongest martial arts masters. His eyes were a little wandering, and he seemed to think of something happy. He smiled and said, "Those years were the most relaxing days for me." "For people?" Lin Yuxian asked. He only heard his father mention 3 people. Lin Fengting's smile stiffened, and his face became a little ugly. But in the end, he said nothing and just said slowly, "Let's go to Linen." Huoding was not far from Linen, only 200 kilometers away. The father and son got in a taxi and told the driver the address. After the taxi got on the airport expressway, it went straight to Linen. Lin Fengting looked out the window. The scenery outside the window went back quickly. The splendid sunset glow had already dimmed. The night spread and seemed to cover everything. The lights on the roadside were on. The light shone on the window, and Lin Fengting saw his face. It was a calm, almost indifferent face. Lin Fengting suddenly felt that this face was somewhat unfamiliar. He was surprised by his own calmness. He recalled the Li family and the Wang family of Beihai. He reminisced with a calmness that he had never experienced before. He recalled Wang Tianzong's involuntary actions, Wang Tianzong's clear conscience, the spectacular collapse of the Li family, and the silence and inaction of the Wang family of Beihai. Before, Lin Fengting had not understood why Wang Tianzong had abandoned the friendship between the Li family and the Wang family of Beihai so naturally, nor could he understand why the Wang family of Beihai and the Li family, who supported each other, had parted ways overnight. Therefore, for many years, he had a deep prejudice against Wang Tianzong's actions and was even a little vigilant. He abandoned his friendship with the Li family. Naturally, He could abandon his friendship with the Lin clan like a pair of worn-out shoes. The Lin clan was outside the world. Therefore, it was hard for Lin Fengding to imagine how indifferent and cruel Wang Tianzong was when he made that series of decisions. However, it was not until this moment, looking at the strange face printed on the window, that Lin Fengding really understood that Wang Tianzong's heart was not indifferent and cruel at that time. The setting sun had completely disappeared. The night shrouded the world. Lin Fengding looked at his face in the window. The face flickered in the receding scenery outside the window. It was a little gloomy and a little brilliant. Only calmness remained unchanged, as always. Lin Fengding felt that he saw Wang Tianzong. Many years ago, when he decided to stand by and do nothing about the Li family, his expression should be so calm. Only calmness. Those friendships still existed. Those times were still warm. The Li family did nothing wrong. Neither did the Wang family. The Lin clan had no reason to condemn anything. When the camaraderie that they had cultivated to protect their common interests was threatened by more important interests, or even survival, betrayal, falling out, and standing idly by, everything seemed so natural and so calm. Lin Fengding's surname was Lin, Li Guangtu's surname was Li, and Wang Tianzong's surname was Wang. Different surnames were the biggest mistake. Have I changed? He looked at his son sitting next to him and suddenly asked very seriously. Lin Yuxian froze for a moment and then smiled. Father hasn't changed. Lin Fengding nodded and said, I haven't changed. It turns out that I'm the same as them. He gradually lost his emotions, and his whole person completely calmed down. At this moment, he completely understood Wang Tianzong, but could not change his choice, just because he was the patriarch of the Lin clan. Lin Yuxian's cell phone rang. It was a short message. He took out his cell phone and looked at it. His face changed slightly. He hesitated and said, Dad, there's just news from Switzerland. My uncle's legs are not working. I'm afraid he will have to rely on a wheelchair in the future. Lin Fengding gently clenched his fist and nodded imperceptibly. Lin Su was blind, and his hearing and language ability began to decline. Now, he lost his legs again under the backfire of the secret of heaven. Lin Su's surname was Lin. For the Lin clan, he could have no regrets. It was just like Lin Fengding's own choice. He said the cause and effect. Next, it was up to Lin Fengding to carry it out. The cause and effect was round, but the cause and effect in Lin Su's mouth was straight. He said everything clearly and straightforwardly, without the slightest twists and turns. That was why the backfire of the secret of heaven was so fierce and even tragic. If the Lin clan wanted to continue to prosper, it needed to keep Qin Weibai alive. The cause and effect between the Lin clan and Qin Weibai still originated from the Li family, or rather, from Li Tianlan. This was the most straightforward cause and effect, and the twists and turns in the middle were the mysterious destiny of heaven. Lin Fengding had no choice. He came to Zhongzhou's state, which proved that he had made up his mind. He could not give up the opportunity to let the Lin clan continue to prosper. So he wanted to keep Qin Weibai alive, and, at the same time, he wanted to keep the root of the cause and effect. That was Li Tianlan. To protect Li Tianlan, he had to protect Li Honghe. This was cause and effect. Lin Fengding knew what it meant. It meant that when protecting this cause and effect, no matter who he faced, even if he faced the Wang family of Beihai or Wang Tianzong, he had to take action. There was no righteousness, just for the Lin clan. Just like Wang Tianzong let the Li family collapse for the Wang family. When it concerned himself, and he had no choice, all the reluctance, unwillingness, and inability would disappear. Because he had no choice, he could only be calm. He had to do this. It didn't matter what others thought or understood, because he had no choice at all. So he had a clear conscience. Wang Tianzong was like this back then. So is Lin Fengding today. How could there be right or wrong? Lin Fengding suddenly patted the driver's seat in the front row. All the sadness, helplessness, and self-mockery disappeared completely when his smile gradually spread, turning into the most basic indifference. He took out a handful of banknotes and threw them to the driver, saying blandly, "Sir, please drive faster. I'm in a hurry." It was cold in Kunlun. Wang Tianzong and Gu Xingyun were drinking. The wine was poured into a sparkling and translucent crystal cup, glowing with a light blue luster. Wang Tianzong picked up the glass in front of him and took a sip, whispering, "It's too strong. It's just right to have a drink before killing." Gu Xingyun's smile was elegant and mellow. In Kunlun City, which was extremely cold because of the whistling wind and snow, the god of war of Zhongzhou State was dressed in a cyan gown, elegant and unrestrained like a scholar who didn't care about the world. "That's right." Wang Tianzong nodded and drank up the wine in the glass. "Has His Majesty decided?" Gu Xingyun poured another glass of wine for Wang Tianzong and asked. He called His Majesty, and his tone was very natural. Not to mention the absolute strength symbolized by the Wang family of Beihai. Wang Tianzong alone was enough to win the respect of all invincible realm experts. "There's nothing to decide," Wang Tianzong said blandly. "This is something that must be done." He pointed to the TV on the wall beside him. Kunlun City was surrounded by wind and snow all year round, but the internal settings were extremely modern. Gu Xingyun's residence was extremely luxurious, and every detail was extremely meticulous. The huge TV, which occupied almost one-third of the wall, was playing a picture. On the picture were different states of Li Tianlan, moving or still, as if he was right in front of them. No one knew how long the picture had been playing. The two of them were no longer in the mood to watch it. "He's a threat." Gu Xingyun glanced at the TV and said, "I can't rest easy if he doesn't die." "Then let him die," Wang Tianzong said blandly. "When we go to Lin this time, I kill people and you restrain them." His tone was very calm, so calm that there was not the slightest ripple in it. Gu Xingyun paused. He looked up at Wang Tianzong's eyes and asked, "Do you want to kill him yourself?" Wang Tianzong just drank the wine in silence. He made his attitude clear and didn't want to talk nonsense. The light blue wine was extremely strong. When he poured into his stomach, he felt hot all over, and even his blood gradually boiled. There was a trace of killing intent in Wang Tianzong's eyes. It was very light, but could obliterate everything. "Okay." Gu Xingyun laughed and said, "You kill Li Honghe, and I kill Li Tianlan." Wang Tianzong nodded indifferently. Gu Xingyun simply put the wine jar beside Wang Tianzong. He thought about it and asked, "Are the three of us enough?" "3 people. Wang Tianzong, Gu Xingyun, Gu Qianchuan." The worst one was an ordinary invincible realm expert. This kind of power, considering only the strength of martial arts and nothing else, was enough to wipe out any force in Zhongzhou State, including the remaining Li family. Gu Xingyun was asking if the 3 of them were strong enough. "What are you worried about?" Wang Tianzong asked. "Just in case." Gu Xingyun shook his head and said, "I don't want any accidents." Wang Tianzong reached out and gently knocked on the famous sword of the Wang family of Beihai beside him. "There will be no accidents. Under the Zhongzhou, sword emperors listen to the sea. Any accidents could be controlled." Gu Xingyun looked at the ancient sword under Wang Tianzong's hand. He was silent for a long time and suddenly said, "There won't be a 4th person?" Wang Tianzong's eyes suddenly flashed a trace of cold electricity. He looked at Gu Xingyun and said nothing. "Is this why you hate Li Honghe?" Gu Xingyun laughed. It was well known that the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State and the God of War of Zhongzhou State had little contact. After Kunlun City replaced the Li family, it basically had no contact with the Wang family of Beihai. Even if there were conflicts on weekdays, the two parties had never publicly expressed any attitude. In short, the two should not be familiar with each other. But obviously, the actual relationship between the two was not like that. "Do you hate the Li family?" Gu Xingyun said, "I think it should be hatred. Otherwise, you probably won't choose to do it in person just because of Li Tianlan. So, in the battle that year, the injury of that person has not healed yet. This is the reason why you hate the Li family. So, you want to kill Li Honghe in person. After the Li family's accident, an expert of the Jiang family who had just broken through the invincible realm entered Mount Dibbing at night. This matter has something to do with Kunlun City, right? If the word hate is used in everything, I also have a reason to hate Kunlun City. Wang Tianzong's tone was gloomy and cold. Gu Xingyun's expression did not change. He said with a smile, "We're not friends. Never." His words were simple. Kunlun City and the Wang family of Beihai were not friends. But at least in those days, the Wang family of Beihai and the Li family were friends. Wang Tianzong and Li Kuangtu were even friends. "Don't talk nonsense," Wang Tianzong said blandly. "Gu Qianchuan is too slow. We should set off soon." Gu Xingyun looked at his watch and suddenly said, "What will you say after the Li family is completely destroyed?" "Destroy the Samsara Palace," Wang Tianzong said without hesitation. The Samsara Palace was now very close to the purgatory of Heaven Capital. To destroy the Samsara Palace, they also needed to cooperate. And on the point of destroying the Samsara Palace, their position was still the same. Gu Xingyun nodded and said again, "What about Sai City?" Wang Tianzong paused while drinking. He was silent for a while, then glanced at Gu Xingyun and said, "Let's wait and see." Gu Xingyun looked at Wang Tianzong. His eyes were a little cold. "Okay." The atmosphere suddenly became a little quiet and depressed. The wine in the pot was poured into the cup and then into the stomach. The fragrance of the wine was overflowing. "That are wrong back then?" Wang Tianzong drank the wine and asked without warning. Back then, there were many years in his and Gu Xingyun's lives. But Gu Xingyun knew which one he was asking about. This question did not need to be answered. In other words, no matter who answered it, there would only be one answer. Gu Xingyun thought for a while and said with a smile, "Did you have a choice back then?" Wang Tianzong laughed at himself. No, only when there was no choice would he cooperate with people who were not friends. For example, Gu Xingyun in front of him. When he made that decision, he was really calm, so calm that there was no room for regret. At this time of night, to linen. Chapter 323. In the evening, the wind blew by the West Lake. The breeze in the night spread at the same time. Under the gloomy sky, the wind wrinkled the surface of the lake. The reflection of the lonely mountain in the clear water spread with the ripples, looking more and more verdant. Lonely Mountain was no longer a tourist attraction of the West Lake. After Li Honghe set foot on Lonely Mountain with the remaining veterans of the Li family, the Lin and officials soon announced that the interior of Lonely Mountain would be renovated. And then there was no then. The municipal government of Lin and reported the matter of Gushin to the provincial government of Jiangxia. The provincial government reported to the cabinet. The cabinet was silent. Therefore, the provincial government and the municipal government fell silent at the same time. The ticket office of Lonely Mountain was canceled, and the surrounding areas were quietly moved out of the sightseeing scope of West Lake. The entire Li family began to take root in Lonely Mountain in the silence of the high-level officials of Zhongzhou State. The higher-ups were still silent. Everyone seemed to have forgotten the Li family in Lonely Mountain. So far, including Kunlun City, no one had expressed any opinion on Li Honghe's occupation of Lonely Mountain. Most of the time, silence was acquiescence. But most of the time, it could also be used as an excuse. However, it was obvious that as long as Li Honghe was still alive, the high-level officials of Zhongzhou State would not have any objection to the Li family's occupation of Lonely Mountain. There were no tourists on Lonely Mountain, and the people had been replaced by spiritual qi. When Li Tianlan came to the foot of Lonely Mountain in a vast twilight, the verdant Lonely Mountain was located in the West Lake. It was hazy, and every grass and tree seemed to be indescribably beautiful. Flowers bloomed on Lonely Mountain. Li Tianlan got off the boat and walked straight along the quiet mountain road. Lonely Mountain was quiet. Li Tianlan's heart gradually became relaxed. He was relaxed, but also nervous. It had been 3 years since he first left the Li family's camp until today. But Li Tianlan still did not make any achievements. He entered the invincible realm in Heaven Capital and was ranked on the divine list today. He was known as the Heavenly Son of Zhongzhou State. That was at the cost of his martial arts foundation. He became the young governor of Sai City because of the friendship between the Li family and Sai City. East Emperor Palace was established. But today, the East Emperor Palace was still pitifully weak. Li Tianlan suddenly felt a little timid. In these 3 years, he seemed to have done a lot. But at the same time, he seemed to have done nothing. He was still in a state where he had just started. His martial Dao and sword intent had already reached a certain level. But the glory of the Li family was still bleak. He arranged some local people to send some fruits, vegetables, and meat every day. Young master, our life is much better than before. Not good enough, Li Tianlan said in a deep voice. He looked up at the seemingly endless mountain road and said softly, "These years, how is everyone?" "Very good." Qingye was silent for a while and then said. She was still smiling, but her smile was extremely complicated. It was a kind of emotion that seemed to be happy and worried. This kind of emotion was so intense that Li Tianlan couldn't tell whether she was sad or happy for a while. "It's just that His Highness is in poor health this year." Li Tianlan was shocked. It was an unchangeable fact that Li Honghe's body would get worse and worse as he lost control of his power. But he didn't expect it to happen so fast. Now it was only the 3rd year. He took a deep breath and said, "I'll go up first, Auntie. I'll chat with you later." Qingye nodded with a smile and passed by Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan took a deep look at her back. Compared with the beautiful but numb and desperate face in his memory, Qingye smiled more now. She would also be sad and anxious when she mentioned her grandfather's body. But now looking at her back, Li Tianlan only felt that she was heroic. The Li family had emotions again. When all these emotions came together, it was hope. This was the current situation of the Li family. The best situation. But the best had nothing to do with him. Li Hong had changed. So the Li family also changed. Li Hong's health was getting worse and worse. Everyone in the Li family was worried, but this hope never disappeared. Even if Li Hong had died tonight, the hope of the Li family would naturally fall on Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan turned around again and walked up the mountain quickly. His footsteps were still heavy, but they were full of firmness. There were some small wooden houses built on the top of Lonely Mountain. There were about 20 or 30 of them. The road on the mountain had been repaired, but the road condition was not good. It could only be said to be flat at best. The 20 or 30 small wooden houses were located in the green flowers and trees, like a small village built on the top of the mountain. The former Li family's camp had become today's Li village. The only thing that didn't change was the vast graveyard that made people tremble with fear. The cemetery was built on the ruins of Qingyun Temple. Mount Qingyun and Lonely Mountain were originally one. After Qingyun Temple disappeared, Mount Qingyun became Lonely Mountain. The highest peak of this lonely mountain had now become the cemetery of the Li family. Nearly 1,000 tombstones were neatly arranged layer by layer. The cemetery did not look gloomy in the night, but a little tragic and a little down. There was no one on the top of the mountain. Only a few lights were lit up in the small houses. Standing on the top of the mountain, Li Tianlan could clearly hear everyone's breathing. It was long, smooth, and rhythmic. This was the breathing rhythm that would only appear after falling into a deep and obvious state. The Holy Family was obvious. Everyone seemed to want to restore their peak state after many years of silence, or even surpass the peak state. Li Tianlan's heart kept sinking. Finally, it sank to the bottom of the valley, just because everyone was meditating, but there were too few of them. Li Tianlan's face was pale. 16 people, including Qingye. There were only 17 people. This was the Li family today. Li Tianlan's body shook, and an indescribable anger instantly occupied all his consciousness. His eyes were scarlet. When he left the border 3 years ago, there were still more than 100 people in the Li family. After the border battle, including the wounded, there were more than 60 people in the Li family who survived. Now, 3 years later, there were less than 20 people left in the Li family. Where did they go? Li Tianlan looked at the large cemetery in front of him, hesitated for a moment, and walked over with difficulty. A stooped old man came out of the cemetery. The old man was thin, and his hair was already gray. Because of his hunchback, his figure looked a little thin. He was carrying a broom in his hand, and it seemed that he had just come back from sweeping the grave. Li Tianlan's footsteps paused. The moment he saw the old man, his mood seemed to suddenly become extremely calm. The old man also saw Li Tianlan. His seemingly turbid eyes lit up quietly, and he said indifferently, "You're back." Li Tianlan said yes. This was the reunion of grandfather and grandson after 3 years. No surprise, no accident. Calm as water, indifferent as night. Li Honghe put the broom aside, waved his hand, and said, "Come in with me." Li Tianlan walked to Li Honghe. He had too much to say, but he didn't know what to say for a while. Grandpa had lost a lot of weight, and his spine, which had been straight all his life, had become crooked. The once high-spirited god of war of Zhongzhou State had gone away. The old man, who had guarded the border with the Li family for 20 years and had endured and been silent, had also gone away. Now he was only in his twilight years. That was the weakness of the rest of his life, with a kind of strength that had almost been completely out of control. At this moment, Li Honghe was so powerful that he seemed to be able to tear the world apart, but it seemed that he might fall down completely in the next second. "Your body." Li Tianlan hesitated and wanted to say something, but stopped on second thought. "Don't worry." Li Honghe's expression was open-minded and peaceful. "It's not the time yet. As long as I want to hold on, I can at least hold on for another 2 or 3 years. What about you?" Li Honghe glanced at Li Tianlan. "What have you learned in the past 3 years?" My body has changed." Li Tianlan said slowly, "Grandpa, I've given up the 24 moves of sword now." In Heaven Capital, he had seen and used the world-shaking unique skill of the Li family from the perspective of the invincible realm. In 3 years, his sword had vaguely jumped out of the scope of the 24 moves of sword and gradually became his own kendo. He had completely understood the 24 moves of sword, and it was time to give up. Li Honghe nodded casually and said, "It's your own way. You decide it yourself." There was no light in the cemetery. The higher they went, the darker it was, so the lights from the small wooden houses under the cemetery became more and more dazzling. "Where are our people?" Li Tianlan was silent for a while and finally couldn't help asking. "Them?" Li Honghe smiled, but his smile was very complicated. "They have gone to the place where they should go. Those who stay now are unwilling to go. When I die, these people will follow you." "Where do they go?" Li Tianlan did not relax and continued to ask. "The place where they should go." Li Honghe's tone was faint and without any emotion. Li Tianlan was about to continue asking, but Li Honghe had already changed the topic. "Tell me about your experience in the past 3 years. Where have you been and what have you learned?" Li Tianlan's 3 years were very simple, but it was very complicated. It seemed that there was nothing to say, but there was too much to say. Li Tianlan sorted out his thoughts and said slowly, "From leaving the Sky Academy to Sai City, to seeing Situ, Sinue's useless heaven and earth, to the primeval forest of Snow Country and the Volga River, to thousands of miles of frozen polar regions, to the mirage in the Pacific Ocean and the falling stars outside Hanga Pass." He talked about the transformation of his willpower, the hidden sword intent after recovery, the golden retriever that followed him, and the famous sword divine punishment that Lin Fengding gave him but was completely broken in his hands. In his story, there appeared the Dongchang clan by Qin Xian, Dongcheng Rushi, Wang Yuedong, Qin Weibai, Samsara Palace, and even the Purgatory of Heaven Capital and the Wang family of Beihai. He said a lot. Li Honghe just listened in silence, without any expression or any opinion. The Li family's cemetery was very big. The grandfather and grandson walked up and down, walking very slowly. The whole Li family was still meditating. Li Honghe took Li Tianlan back to his very small wooden house. There was almost no decoration in the wooden house. A hard bed, a wooden table, and a few stools were all the furniture. However, they could take root in such a place where they could feel the climate change, with sunshine, rain, and snow. Compared with the Li family's past, this place was like a paradise. He enunciated each and every word clearly. Li Honghe was here. The people of the Li family were also here. If the Li family was destroyed under the joint efforts of Wang Tianzong and Gu Xingyun, then what was the Li family he guarded? What was the point? Maybe. Li Honghe looked at Li Tianlan with complicated eyes and suddenly said, if it were him, he wouldn't have come back. Who is he? Li Tianlan asked seriously. He carefully watched Li Honghe's expression and didn't want to miss any detail. Li Honghe kept his mouth shut and just looked at Li Tianlan quietly. I have a few questions, Li Tianlan said. I should have asked them 3 years ago. I hope you can answer my doubts, Grandpa. Say it. Li Honghe was expressionless. Does the master of Samsara Palace and Wei Bai have anything to do with you? Who is the master of Samsara Palace? Li Tianlan asked. There could be no love for no reason in this world. Samsara Palace's protection of him. Qin Weibai's deep love for him. Li Tianlan believed that there would be an explanation for all this. At present, this explanation could only be obtained from Li Honghe. Li Honghe looked at Li Tianlan silently. His eyes were a little strange and complicated. He looked at Li Tianlan for a long time, then shook his head and said, I don't know. You don't know? Li Tianlan asked in reply. I really don't know. Li Honghe said with a wry smile, it was the master of Samsara Palace who found me. At that time, you were still in the desert prison, and my state was very bad. At that time, unless I fought desperately, I was no match for the master of Samsara Palace. When she came to me, she was not interested in the Li family at all. She was only interested in you. I could see that she would not harm you. So when you left the border, I gave you the contact information she had left. Li Tianlan took a deep breath and continued. What about the Dongxing clan? The Li family owes the Dongxing clan. Li Honghe said blandly. It has to continue to owe them. Li Tianlan frowned again. The identity of the master of Samsara Palace was not revealed. The matter of the Dongxing clan was another answer in Li Honghe's mouth. The answer he got from the Dongxing clan was that the Dongxing clan owed the Li family, not the Li family owed the Dongxing clan. What else do you want to ask? Li Honghe glanced at Li Tianlan and said. The muscles at the corners of Li Tianlan's mouth trembled. He suddenly smiled and said, Does Grandpa know the purgatory of heaven capital? Yes. Li Honghe narrowed his eyes. Who is the deity of the purgatory of heaven capital? Li Tianlan looked at Li Honghe and asked. Li Honghe looked at Li Tianlan quietly, with a calm face. Is deity my father? Li Tianlan's voice trembled a little. It shouldn't be, right? He didn't know who deity was. But when he thought of what his grandfather had said to him a long time ago, he thought of deity's unique skill formed by countless changes of the 24 moves of sword, combined with his age and the conversation he had with Wang Tianzong in Heaven Capital. Li Tianlan didn't want to admit it. But countless speculations in his mind told him that the deity of the purgatory of Heaven Capital was his father, Li Kuang-tu. Li Tianlan really didn't want to admit it, because when he broke through to the invincible realm in Heaven Capital, he could clearly feel that whether it was Wang Tianzong or deity, there was always a wisp of killing intent condensed on him. If deity was really his father, why did he want to kill him in Heaven Capital back then? He's not. Li Honghe finally spoke. He sighed softly and said, He's really not. Li Tianlan breathed a sigh of relief and looked at Li Honghe quietly. So, the future of the Li family still depends on you. Li Honghe said softly. Li Tianlan nodded. Grandpa, don't worry. His tone was calm and confident. The Li family will regain its glory in my hands. Whether it's the Wang family of Beihai or Kunlun City, I will make them pay back little by little. Oh, the Li family. Li Honghe's eyes were in a trance. The Wang family of Beihai. For the first time, there was a trace of undisguised pain in his eyes. That pain was so clear and deep in his old eyes. It was like a scar was carved into his eyes. He smiled and laughed at himself. What if the Wang family of Beihai didn't owe the Li family? What? Li Tianlan was stunned. I mean, if it was the Li family that owed the Wang family of Beihai, what would you do? Li Honghe asked. Li Tianlan had never thought about this question. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. He remembered what his grandfather had said to him in Lonely Mountain 3 years ago. In my life, I haven't done many right things, but I've done many wrong things. But many mistakes can be made up for in the end. But some mistakes can't be made up for today. I can only make the best of them. Make the best of them? What did the Li family really do wrong back then? Li Tianlan's brain was a little confused for a moment. What did we do wrong back then? You're right. Li Honghe smiled helplessly and sadly. It's my fault. I'm too cowardly. It's all my fault. A voice suddenly sounded, drifting, as if it were falling from the ninth heaven, covering the entire lonely mountain in an instant. You're right, too. For many things, there is no right or wrong. Only success or failure can determine the result. Why do you blame yourself, Senior Li? Li Tianlan stood up abruptly. It was Wang Tianzong's voice. He took a step subconsciously and was about to go out. Don't move. Li Honghe suddenly roared in a low voice. Li Tianlan froze and stood where he was subconsciously. He still came. Li Honghe whispered he finally came. He slowly raised his palm. Li Tianlan's pupils suddenly contracted. In his sight, Li Honghe just raised his palm gently and crossed the air, but his whole arm seemed to be cut by a sword in the process of raising it. It was just a simple movement, but it spilled blood. The blood gushed out of Li Honghe's palm, but it didn't drip down. Instead, it floated in the air. It dyed the air red. The air seemed to have completely solidified. Li Honghe gently shook his hand. Countless beads of blood suddenly floated in the air, dyeing a large area of space red. Li Tianlan's pupils instantly contracted to the extreme. There was no air around him. Every corner of the small house was filled with sword energy unconsciously. The sword energy filled every inch of space and had turned into exquisite and sharp gaseous sword shadows one after another. Follow me, Li Honghe said, and suddenly clenched his fist. The powerful sword intent instantly spread around Li Honghe, and the sword energy quietly emerging in the whole house was directly swept away. Li Tianlan followed his grandfather out of the door. He saw everything outside. In an instant, even with his willpower, he couldn't help but feel a little suffocated for a while. There was absolute darkness everywhere outside the room. The bright moon over Lin and had completely disappeared. A vortex with a diameter of thousands of meters appeared at the highest point of the sky. The vortex flowed slowly and completely covered the whole mountain. The sword intent all over the sky roared and took shape in the flow of the vortex. In front of Li Tianlan, there were all swords. The air was completely torn apart and condensed into exquisite and sharp sword shadows one after another. The sword shadows covered the sky, the earth, and lonely mountain. Countless sword shadows were thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions. Lonely Mountain was disappearing. Heaven and earth were disappearing. The majestic and dense sword shadows appeared in every corner of the whole Lonely Mountain, densely packed. Li Tianlan couldn't see Wang Tianzong. Only his voice rang out in the night sky. Senior Li, as long as you can walk out of this sword curtain tonight, all the grievances between the Wang family of Beihai and the Li family in the past can be written off. Li Tianlan breathed quickly. His breath was even filled with sword intent, which stabbed his internal organs and made him feel a sharp pain. This was the first time that Li Tianlan had seen Wang Tianzong's sword intent. It was the peak of sword intent. Every grass, every tree, every mountain, every water, the whole world, as long as he needed, everything was the sword in his hand. It was invincible and invincible. The sword shadows that occupied the whole world hung in the air. But the entire Li family seemed to have no foothold under this sword curtain. The sword shadows were like a raging tide, covering the world, roaring and surging. This was the sword emperor of Zhongzhou State. What covered Lonely Mountain was the peak of sword intent in the entire dark world for decades. Chapter 324. The night turned into the deepest black, obscuring the moonlight and covering all the light. Everything on Lonely Mountain seemed to disappear completely. In all directions on the ground, in the sky and on the ground, as far as the eye could see, there were swords. The swords were densely packed together. The sword shadows were short and delicate, but they were indescribably sharp. Countless sword shadows hovered over the entire lonely mountain, row after row, piece after piece, up and down, everywhere, as far as the eye could see. Li Tianlan felt as if he had seen a sea. The ubiquitous sword intent around him was like the sea breeze on the sea. The sound of the wind was sharp, but seemingly soft. It was a little cold and gloomy. Li Tianlan's breath was full of sword intent. The sword intent rushed into his internal organs through his breath and pierced his blood vessels. In an instant, Li Tianlan's body was already injured internally and externally. But the sword sea in front of him still hovered motionlessly in every corner of reality. It was like a calm sea, but no matter how calm it was still a sea, and it had the power to set off a raging tide and subvert everything at any time. Li Tianlan stared at the endless sword sea in front of him. He could feel that it was a sword strike. But this sword strike was completely beyond his understanding. He used to stand at the peak of martial arts. Even if his strength was gone now, his vision had never regressed. He could see that the world was quiet. He could see that the world was a void. He could see some of the trajectory of this sword strike. But he couldn't understand how powerful it was to have such an abundant and majestic sword intent. In the face of this sword strike, not to mention now, even if he entered the invincible realm in Heaven Capital, he might not have the slightest strength to resist. At this moment, Li Tianlan felt like an ant under the Sword Emperor's sword. The other members of the Leaf family on the top of the mountain were still motionless and seemed to be meditating. However, amidst the silence, some pained and hurried breathing sounds became extremely clear. The meditation had ended at the moment when the sword intent appeared. However, all the members of the Leaf family were completely blocked by this sword strike. The sword shadow and the sword energy coexisted, as if they were all over the world. Everyone was suppressed in place and could not move. Only Li Honghe remained calm. Wisps of sword intent spread around him, firmly protecting the space of about 10 meters around him. Wherever the sword intent passed, the sword shadows floating in front of him shattered. The sword shadow shattered into sword chi. The sword chi circled around Lonely Mountain and formed a new sword shadow. The cycle continued without end, and it seemed like the cycle of reincarnation. Li Honghe was motionless, letting the sword shadows in front of him break and reassemble. He kept releasing his sword intent, breaking the sword shadows within 10 meters around him. At this moment, the place where Li Honghe landed was the only pure land in Lonely Mountain. The pure land was only 10 meters wide, but the entire Lonely Mountain was more than 1,000 feet long. Li Honghe silently looked at the sea of swords in front of him that covered his whole vision and even occupied his whole consciousness. He saw a large number of sword shadows shattering, and then saw a large number of sword shadows reforming. What an impressive move, Shatter Reincarnation. Li Honghe sighed softly. Did you derive this sword move by yourself? Wang Tianzong was silent. There was only a sea of swords on Lonely Mountain, but no sword emperor. Li Tianlan's heart suddenly shook. Broken Reincarnation. It was the last move of the 24 moves of sword, the absolute sword. Or rather, it was the last half of the style. 3 years ago, Li Tianlan once got the half-style sword manual from Lin Fengting. But before that, even in the 24 moves of sword of the Leaf family, there was no such half-style. But recently, Wang Tianzong used a complete move, Broken Reincarnation. If this sword move was derived by himself, how familiar would he be with the first 23 moves of the 24 moves of sword? Tianzong, don't you come out and talk with me? Li Honghe laughed. Anyway, I'm very happy that you can come to Lonely Mountain today. The Sea of Swords seemed to fluctuate with Wang Tianzong's emotions. So the whole world was shaking in front of Li Tianlan's eyes. The huge vortex, spinning endless sword intent in the sky, paused for a moment. Silently, Wang Tianzong's figure appeared in front of Li Honghe and Li Tianlan. The three of them were less than 10 meters apart. Wang Tianzong looked at Li Honghe calmly. Li Honghe was also looking at Wang Tianzong. His eyes were complicated, self-deprecating, and a little guilty. Li Tianlan looked at this scene and felt like he was witnessing history. The grievances that had existed for many years clearly appeared in front of him. In the sea of swords, in front of him, Wang Tianzong hesitated, but still bowed deeply to Li Honghe and whispered, "Uncle Li." Li Honghe laughed. The past grudges and grievances seemed to become clear with the words, "Uncle Li." "You hate me," Li Honghe said. "Hate doesn't make sense." Wang Tianzong shook his head. He looked at Li Honghe's increasingly old face, and his eyes were no longer calm. In a sense, in the past many years, Li Honghe was one of his closest elders. Even now, Wang Tianzong still clearly remembered the days when he learned swordsmanship with Li Honghe. The four of them learned the 24 moves of sword of the Li family, the 24 moves of sword of the Lin clan, and the 6 paths of reincarnation of the Wang family of Beihai. It was an unguarded time. The children studied hard, and the elders spared no effort in teaching. Wang Tianzong's emotions were chaotic and absent-minded. In the face of Li Tianlan, he could be calm because he was the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai and the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State. But in the face of Li Honghe, he thought he could be calm and indifferent as well. But until he stood in front of him, Wang Tianzong knew that he was still the child of that year. At this moment, he was neither the Sword Emperor nor the Patriarch. He was just Wang Tianzong. "You deserve to hate me," Li Honghe whispered. "I owe the Wang family of Beihai too much. You deserve to kill me today." "I don't hate you." Wang Tianzong looked into Li Honghe's eyes. "I know very well that when the Heroes Club, Fantasy World, and the Polar Ground Alliance joined forces to invade Zhongzhou State, my father's serious injury and death a few years later had nothing to do with you." Li Honghe was silent. He had a clear conscience in that battle. The old patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai was seriously injured. He was also seriously injured. Wang Tianzong would not hate him because of this. Most of the grievances between the Li family and the Wang family came from that battle. "It's my fault. Everything happened because of me. I thought you would come looking for me a few years ago." Li Honghe laughed at himself. The Li family and the Wang family have walked side by side for hundreds of years. That's not fake. Wang Tianzong's voice was very soft, and his emotions were very sincere. "If the Li family doesn't enter the secular world from now on, I don't want to care about what happened that year. But now it's different." Li Honghe nodded and asked straightforwardly, "Will I die today?" "Yes." Wang Tianzong's tone was very respectful and firm. "How about Tianlan and the Li family?" Li Honghe asked again. "I'll only kill you today." Wang Tianzong's tone was indifferent. That was very clear. He only killed Li Honghe. As for whether others would kill Li Tianlan or not, he would not care. Li Honghe did not speak, just looked at Wang Tianzong quietly. Wang Tianzong's tone was calm and soft. "You can't go back if you're wrong. Senior Li, the biggest mistake in your life is that you educated a good grandson, but you didn't educate your son well. If you were the fanatic of that year, what would you do?" Li Honghe suddenly asked. "I don't know." Wang Tianzong's mood did not fluctuate at all. "I didn't think about it either." Li Honghe chuckled. "Ambition. Sure enough, it can achieve everything and destroy everything." Wang Tianzong was silent. But the sea of swords in heaven and earth began to shake gently. The sword energy raged and swept across the sky. "Whether you believe it or not, I want to say that I didn't know at the beginning." Li Honghe whispered. "Fanatic has been ambitious since he was a child, and he inherited the stubbornness of the Li family. You entered the invincible realm a few years later than him, and at that time, your father's health was extremely poor, so he thought he saw an opportunity. He wanted to change and wanted to have a say in Zhongzhou State. He thought that the strength of the Li family was irresistible, and the Li family did not need any allies to advance and retreat together. So, Wang Tianzong suddenly interrupted Li Honghe's words. So he wanted to annex the Wang family of Beihai, even destroy the whole Wang family of Beihai, replace the Wang family of Beihai, monopolize the whole southeast group, and then conquer the whole Zhongzhou State? Li Honghe's body stiffened. Li Tianlan, who had been watching silently, also trembled and looked at Li Honghe and Wang Tianzong in disbelief. He had to do a lot of things in those days. Within the Southeast group, the power contrast between the Li family and the Wang family of Beihai began to tilt. The power of the Li family even vaguely suppressed that of the Wang family of Beihai. During that time, you were all concerned about your father's health and neglected the control of the outside world. I was in charge of the Southeast group, but most of the time I was staring at the Prince group. By the time I realized what Fanatic had done, it was too late. He had completed his own layout and was only waiting for your father's death. Then he could control everything. Wang Tianzong listened quietly. He nodded and said, "So you made the best of the mistake." "Yes. How could the friendship with the Wang family of Beihai be more important than your son and the Li family? I wanted to stop it." Li Honghe smiled a little miserably. "But you should know Fanatic's character. He was ambitious, resourceful, and his character was extreme. By the time he thought he could let me know, the general trend had basically been formed. It was not easy for me to stop it. I had been mediocre all my life and was not strong enough. At that time, your father was in danger, and Fanatic entered the invincible realm earlier than you. Countless people in the Southeast group put their hopes on him. During that time, his voice in the Southeast group was enough to go against my will. I didn't want to break with the Wang family of Beihai, but the situation had reached that point. It seemed that everyone was forcing me to break with the Wang family of Beihai and completely annex you." The yellow robe, Wang Tianzong's tone was full of sarcasm. "It hasn't come to that point yet." Li Honghe shook his head. "At least in my opinion, there was still a chance to calm the situation back then. I talked with Fanatic several times and did something secretly. He was my son, and I knew his character very well. According to his character, if he succeeded in annexing the Wang family of Beihai, the future of the Li family would either be extremely brilliant or be doomed eternally. His path was too extreme, but I didn't want that kind of risky future. I wanted to try my best to reverse all this. I even wanted to go to Mount Dibbing to communicate with your father." Li Honghe smiled bitterly. "But you moved too fast. Before I was ready, you had already united with Gu Xingyun and created the treason case on the border of An State. When I got the news, it was too late. Did I do something wrong?" Wang Tianzong asked. He had asked this question to many people. Just a few hours ago, he had asked Gu Xingyun. Gu Xingyun said that he had no choice. But Li Honghe only kept silent. The treason case directly subverted the Li family. As the patriarch of the Li family, Li Honghe could not say that Wang Tianzong did the right thing. He could only choose to be silent. "I don't know if I can believe you. But even if I can, Uncle Li, tell me, do I dare to believe it? The inheritance of the Wang family of Beihai for hundreds of years, the assets of trillions or even more, the stability of tens of millions of people, the future of hundreds of thousands of troops, and even the peace and stability of the entire Zhongzhou state." Wang Tianzong patted his chest. "My father was in danger at that time, and all this was on me. If you were me, would you dare to bet on my trust in you with these things?" The topic that had been suppressed in his heart for many years made him a little excited. He took a step forward and walked directly into the range of Li Honghe's sword energy. "Answer me. If you were me, would you dare to bet?" "I wouldn't dare." Li Honghe finally spoke. His voice was dry and hoarse. "I wouldn't dare either." Wang Tianzong took a deep breath and calmed down. "And even if I dared, you might not be able to reverse everything at that time. The hundreds of years of affection between our two families may be as heavy as mountains and seas, but I have a clear conscience. If I hadn't taken action that year, everything that the Li family has today would be what the Wang family of Beihai has today. Maybe the Wang family of Beihai would be inferior to the Li family today, far inferior." Wang Tianzong said coldly, "It was you who threatened the survival of the Wang family of Beihai. What choice did I have? If there was another choice, I wouldn't have let her besiege Li Kuangtu that year. When she just entered the invincible realm, she went to cooperate with Kunlun City to besiege Li Kuangtu. Both you and I should know what that means. That's the main reason why you hate me, right?" Li Honghe said softly. "She was beaten down to the invincible realm, and her injury has not healed yet. That was your most serious loss. If it hadn't happened, why would you be so tired all these years? You can think so. Wang Tianzong looked indifferent. The Li family wanted to annex the Wang family of Beihai, and I couldn't agree. Everything I did was with a clear conscience. But the Wang family was not destroyed, and she was beaten down to the invincible realm. In my eyes, that's all the grievances. He bowed to Li Honghe again and said softly, "Seniorly, it was the Li family that taught me everything in the world. There's no right or wrong, only success or failure. I don't hate you. As long as you can walk through this sea of swords and appear in front of me, the grievances between the Li family and the Wang family of Beihai can be written off." His figure slowly disappeared in front of the sea of swords and became fainter and fainter. But his voice swept through the sky and echoed between heaven and earth. "This is the 24 moves of sword that you taught me, and it's also my understanding of it. All my understanding has been turned into this move, break of reincarnation." Wang Tianzong said calmly, "It's perfect to use the unique skill of the Li family to end the grievances with the Li family." Li Honghe looked at the sea of swords in front of him. The sea of swords was shaking, as if the sea was fluctuating. Huge waves were coming. A frenzy was coming. It was a pitch-black sea. Li Honghe's body lit up. Endless sword energy whistled in front of him and turned into the purest light. He turned around and looked at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan was also looking at Li Honghe. "The Wang family of Beihai is right," Li Honghe said softly. Li Tianlan, who had completely calmed down, nodded and said slowly, "The Li family is right. It was only ambition that was wrong. And there was no absolute right or wrong in the world. There was only success or failure. Even if it was a grievance, it should be pure. I'll go to the other side of the sea and have a look." Li Honghe pointed to the sea of swords in front of him and said softly, "If you have a chance, leave quickly and don't worry about anything else." He took a step forward. The extreme and pure light suddenly spread wildly with Li Honghe's straightened body. Above Lonely Mountain, the tide suddenly sounded. The boundless sea of swords was completely violent in an instant. The whole sea was completely lifted up, rushed up into the sky, and fell rapidly. Violent swords, chaotic swords. The sword light shuttled through every corner of Lonely Mountain, like a black tide, surging and raging. The light was still moving forward, slowly piercing the darkness. In the light, a little blood shot out. There was more and more blood. In a frozen space, the blood dyed the night red. The sword light shrouded Lonely Mountain. The moonlight shrouded Westlake. The broken bridge, the ancient tower, the lush flowers and plants, the clear water. The moonlight shone down. Westlake in the night was quiet and almost beautiful, like a picture scroll that should not exist in the world. Gu Xingyun stood quietly on the broken bridge. He was enjoying the scenery, but his whole mind was feeling the sword intent on Lonely Mountain. Lonely Mountain had become the only darkness in the night. The moonlight was completely shattered by the sword intent, and the whole Lonely Mountain was dark. The pure darkness was like a void. The lake water was turbulent in the sword intent. From far to near, the ripples in the water were spreading. The ripples grew bigger and bigger and turned into waves. The waves became billows. The billows became waves. The violent force was shaking in West Lake with Lonely Mountain as the center. The lake water was lifted up in the absolute force and spread over the lake. The sound of the water almost suppressed everything. Gu Xingyun stood on the bridge and looked across the lake to Lonely Mountain. It was getting darker and darker on Lonely Mountain. Gu Xingyun gently raised the corner of his mouth and said to himself, "It's really lively." No one responded to his words. The sword intent on Lonely Mountain became more and more fierce and violent. Suddenly, a dazzling light appeared in the absolute darkness. The light flashed away, and then it was completely suppressed by the darkness again. Gu Xingyun laughed out loud. He knew that Li Honghe had taken action. But what covered Lonely Mountain was the peak sword intent in the whole dark world for decades, which was almost irresistible. Even at his peak, Li Honghe might not be able to take this sword stroke. Now his strength might have broken through the peak, but his body was much worse. How could he block this sword stroke? The Leaf family is destined to be destroyed tonight. Gu Xingyan muttered to himself again. For you, this is really something to be happy about. A cold but soft voice suddenly sounded in Gu Xingyan's ear. But will what you hope really happen? Gu Xingyan suddenly turned around and looked at the sky behind him. A white figure appeared, silently less than 20 meters behind him. The woman wore a long white dress, but she wore a golden mask that covered most of her beautiful face. She stood in the air. Her slender figure seemed to block the bright moon. So Gu Xingyan's eyes dimmed, and there was only a white shadow left in his eyes. C'est-tu Sanyue? Gu Xingyan raised his eyebrows and sneered. You dare to intervene in this matter? Why not? C'est-tu Sanyue said quietly. Do you think it's useful for you to come? Gu Xingyan sneered. His elegant face looked a little ferocious and distorted in the darkness. Tonight, the Leaf family will be destroyed, and no one can stop it. After the Leaf family, it will be your Sai City. No one can escape. The Leaf family will not be destroyed. C'est-tu Sanyue said softly. Even if Wang Tianzong can't kill him, I will. Gu Xingyan stopped smiling and said in a cold tone, Do you think you can stop Wang Tianzong? Or can you stop me? It's enough that I can deal with you. C'est-tu Sanyue's voice was neither fast nor slow. Gu Xingyan had completely calmed down and said lightly, Stop. Fuck you, madman. Gu Xingyan, who had just calmed down for less than a second, suddenly roared and rushed to the sky without hesitation. The moonlight was still bright, but the pale white moonlight completely dimmed in an instant. Heaven and earth were disappearing and going away. C'est-tu Sanyue's figure instantly became very clear in Gu Xingyan's sight. The white dress fluttered in the void. Gu Xingyan could see all the lines on the golden mask clearly. C'est-tu Sanyue's rosy and beautiful lips were tightly pursed, and her cold eyes had become determined and crazy in an instant. The moonlight was fading. Finally, it disappeared completely. Sound, waves, sword intent, light all disappeared. In the dark void, only Gu Xingyan and C'est-tu Sanyue were left. Useless heaven and earth. This was the most powerful, unique skill of Sai City. When Gu Xingyan's body slightly lost balance in C'est-tu Sanyue's domain, the 10th unique domain of Kunlun City had been fully opened. C'est-tu Sanyue raised her hand. His arm lit up with a devilish purple light that was powerful enough to shatter the void. The purple light turned into a small but ferocious hand cannon. Gu Xingyan's face was twisted and completely deformed. The distance between them was less than 50 meters. The famous murderous weapon Setting Sun was dozens of meters away from Gu Xingyan. No hesitation, no hesitation. C'est-tu Sanyue didn't even think about it. She didn't waste time at all. The moment the purple hand cannon was formed, the muzzle was aimed at Gu Xingyan. She pulled the trigger. Boom! The silent void was broken. Heaven and earth were useless. The 10th unique domain. They were all broken. The entire extremely quiet world was completely occupied by the absolute roar in an instant. The violent sound occupied all hearing. The sky above the West Lake suddenly lit up with a purple light that pierced through heaven and earth. The purple light kept rising and dancing, breaking the broken bridge and evaporating the lake water. Gu Xingyan's body was directly blasted into the bottom of the lake by the murderous weapon. The whole West Lake was shaking violently. All the lake water within a radius of thousands of meters suddenly exploded under the shot. The monstrous waves directly surged to the sky thousands of meters high. The strong purple light blocked the moonlight and covered everything. The demonic purple chi was vast and mighty. Under the moonlight, on West Lake. Chapter 325. Gu Xingyan never expected that C'est-tu Sanyue would be so tough. For more than 20 years, Sai City had been hidden in the northeast. C'est-tu Sanyue, known as the hidden god of Zhongzhou State, was also one of the invincible realm experts in Zhongzhou State, but she rarely went down Mount Taibai. Since the establishment of Sai City 3 years ago, it seemed that C'est-tu Sanyue went down the mountain for the first time. Now, it was the second time. In the long years, the once stunning woman seemed to be silent with the ice and snow on Mount Taibai. She seemed to have forgotten the whole world and kept silent, as if nothing had anything to do with her. Gu Xingyun and Wang Tianzong joined hands. They had thought that Situ Xingyue would come, but neither of them expected that she would express her position so fiercely and resolutely. Among the 12 murderous weapons, Setting Sun's power was average, but its energy storage time was the fastest. It was the most suitable weapon for some forces with insufficient foundation. After all, no matter how weak the power of a murderous weapon was, it could directly threaten the life and death of an invincible realm expert. Situ Songyue and Gu Xingyun were only dozens of meters away. The distance was too close. The moment the setting sun finished storing energy and lit up, it had shattered the domains of the two invincible realm experts and directly exploded in front of Gu Xingyun's chest. For hundreds of years, since the appearance of the murderous weapon in the Dark World, this was the first time that a murderous weapon had fired at a person in its own country or force. Situ Songyue's action was so abrupt and determined that Gu Xingyun had no time to react. The surging purple light covered the whole lake, and the majestic power turned into a purple light beam visible to the naked eye. The deafening roar suppressed Gu Xingyun's furious roar. The destructive energy suppressed Gu Xingyun and directly blasted him to the bottom of the lake. Destroyed, torn, twisted. For the first time in his life, Gu Xingyun was so frightened. He could clearly feel the surging power tearing every inch of his flesh and blood, twisting his internal organs, as if it wanted to completely destroy his whole body here. He was hit by the murderous weapon at such a close distance, and the shadow of death instantly enveloped all his consciousness. He couldn't die. As the only pillar of Kunlun City now, how could he die here without any psychological preparation when Kunlun City had a bright future? Blood burst out from every corner of Gu Xingyun's body and turned into a blood mist, dyeing the lake red. Gu Xingyun's eyes also became red. The lake water was constantly surging in the chaotic energy. Through the clear water, Gu Xingyun could vaguely see Situ Songyue's white dress above the lake. He suddenly became extremely angry and resentful. B*TCH. This slut. Those who have been played by Li Kuang-tu were all bitches. Do you feel so good after being played by Li Kuang-tu? So much so that you couldn't forget it for more than 20 years? The muscles all over Gu Xingyun's body began to swell. Absolute power surged in his body, and his eyes were scarlet and tyrannical. He didn't want to die. At the very least, he didn't want to die in the hands of these lowly women. The purple light pressed against his chest. The violent, destructive power bombarded Gu Xingyun at an unimaginable speed. Gu Xingyun opened his mouth and roared. He was at the bottom of the lake, but the moment he opened his mouth, all the lake water within a radius of 1,000 meters was instantly pushed out with him as the center. 9th Nether Impasse. 10th Unique Domain. The 2 domains of the 10 skills of true martial arts were constantly superimposed, and the deep lake suddenly began to boil and surge. Sword light appeared around Gu Xingyun. Layers of sword light flew wildly around him, like a blooming flower. The flower turned into a complicated sword formation. The sword formation suddenly formed a storm. The 8th Supreme Sword Dance. Countless sword lights whizzed and spun around him, layer after layer without end. Gu Xingyun's body had been completely shrouded by the sword light, which was still rotating. Countless sword shadows passed through the void around Gu Xingyun, spread into the lake, and flew wildly in the area within a radius of 1,000 meters. The place where Gu Xingyun stood formed a tornado completely composed of sword light. The tornado spread at the bottom of the lake, and the whole lake's surface was undulating in the storm. The surging and strange purple light kept rushing into the lake. West Lake turned purple in the night. The lake's surface turned into a crazy whirlpool. The monstrous waves kept rising with purple light. Situ Songyue raised one hand high. The purple sun in her palm was constantly expanding. Looking from a distance, Situ Sangya, who was delicate and slim, seemed to be holding a sun in her hand. Gu Xingyun's cold roar had rushed out of the bottom of the lake. The purple light was still moving forward, but the sword light rotated and scattered the purple light. Then it drove the lake water to rotate and fly out again, condensing in Situ Sangyue's hand. The power of the murderous weapon still existed. However, Gu Xingyun broke out regardless of the consequences. The defense of the 8th Supreme Sword Dance had reached the limit. The sword light formed a storm. Every time the storm rotated, it drove the power of the murderous weapon to be constantly reflected to Situ Sangyue. Gu Xingyun used his own unique skill to force Situ Sangyue to bear the power of the setting sun with him. Situ Sangyue's face was pale. She raised her palm again. One hand became 2 hands. The purple sun above her hands was getting bigger and bigger. The surging waves of purple light had condensed into a huge ball in her hand. With Situ Sangyue's own sword intent, Gu Xingyun's sword intent, and the power of the murderous weapon, the ball kept expanding. He borrowed the enemy's power for his own use. How familiar was this scene? All-embracing collection. There is only one word difference between this move and all-embracing collection, but their martial arts concepts were surprisingly consistent. However, compared with the unique skill of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, which was famous in the Dark World, Situ Sangyue's all-embracing collection obviously could not make good use of the enemy's power. She could also borrow the enemy's power for her own use, but she was constantly bearing the power reflected by the enemy in the whole process. Situ Sangyue. In an instant, Gu Xingyun's roar had sounded at the bottom of the lake and surged to the sky. The whole lake was almost completely overturned in the rotating storm of sword intent. The domain around Gu Xingyun continued to shrink and spread. He was covered in blood and was about to rush out of the lake. A touch of madness suddenly flashed in Situ Sangyue's eyes. Her white dress was fluttering in the air. Her body suddenly tightened. The purple sun condensed on her hands flew out and was directly smashed to the bottom of the lake by her. The purple light was dazzling to the extreme in an instant. The moment the storm rushed out of the lake, the scorching sun fell. The whole West Lake seemed to be silent for a moment. For an eternal moment, everything seemed to freeze in an instant. Then it was the most thorough destruction. The dazzling lightning flashed in the surging lake water along with the purple light, and a mountain rose from the violent lake surface. The mountain rose abruptly, reaching a height of 1,000 meters. At the moment when the 10th unique domain and heaven and earth collided, the mountain rising from the lake seemed to be frozen in the void forever. The purple light flashed in the void with the strongest power of the 2 invincible realm experts on the divine list and suddenly exploded in the void. The mountain burst into pieces in an instant with immeasurable sword intent and immeasurable light. There seemed to be the sound of a flash flood in the air. What rose from the lake in an instant was not a mountain at all, but a huge white wave that reached a height of 1,000 meters. The void disappeared, and the huge wave collapsed. The huge wave turned into a raging tide that could cover everything, surging and beating everything around it. The broken bridge, the flat ground, and the dense flowers and plants suddenly became broken and fragmented with the beating of the huge wave. In the area where the 2 fought, the area with a radius of 1,000 meters became a real absolute domain in an instant. The demonic purple light completely dimmed. Situ Sangyue's white dress fluttered. Her body swayed in the air, and she suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood. Gu Xingyun, who was covered in blood, suddenly rushed out of the lake. Without looking at Situ Sangyue, he flew directly to the southwest. Far away from Lonely Mountain, the moonlight turned into a clear glow and shone down. It was lonely. Situ Sangyue, whose face was pale, suddenly stood up straight in the air. Her figure flashed in the air, and there were suddenly countless residual shadows under the night sky. Her white clothes fluttered in the residual shadows. Instead of chasing Gu Xingyun, She rushed directly in the direction of Lonely Mountain. Around Lonely Mountain, the mountains and rivers had been completely connected by the sword intent. The violent sword intent formed a sea. The endless sword shadows turned into the water in the sea. Between the sword shadows, there were huge waves and surging tides. The sword shadows filled the top and bottom of Lonely Mountain, and there was no place to stand. This was a real, overwhelming sword shadow that filled all the fields of vision. It shuttled back and forth endlessly. On Lonely Mountain, all the flowers and trees were torn apart, and huge cracks began to appear on the solid ground. The deep darkness became deeper and deeper. In front of Situ Sanyue, there was nothing but swords and swords. Only those who saw the magnificent scene of this sword could really understand what the 4 words Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State meant. Situ Sanyue raised her head and looked at the top of the mountain. The top of the mountain was already a pure darkness without the slightest light. It enveloped everything, as if it would never change. Situ Sanyue took a deep breath and stepped onto Lonely Mountain. Around her, thousands of sword shadows suddenly surged like a tide and rain, completely drowning her figure in an instant. Situ Sanyue was climbing the mountain. Military Counselor was also climbing the mountain. However, when Situ Sanyue just started to take a step, Military Counselor had reached the top of the mountain. The top of Mount Dibbing was the most magnificent. The endless vast palaces stretched all the way among the flowers and plants, and there were countless pavilions and terraces. Standing on the top of Mount Dibbing, no matter from which angle, it was the most beautiful scenery. For the enemies of the Wang family of Beihai, the mountain was full of scenery. The foot of the mountain was full of traps. Climbing the mountain was more difficult than going to the sky. This sentence was the most suitable to describe Mount Dibbing. Under this not-so-steep mountain, more than 50,000 elite troops were stationed almost all the year round. Moreover, they were well-equipped and had excellent cooperative combat ability. These 50,000 troops were the famous internal defense force of the Wang family of Beihai, an elite force that could be called a trump card in any country. The internal defense force of the Wang family of Beihai could monitor almost every corner of every road in Mount Dibbing and make the fastest response in the shortest time. If any enemy wanted to enter Mount Dibbing, it was impossible to bypass the internal defense force of the royal family. If it was a strong attack, even if the 50,000 troops could hold on for a while, it was enough to hold on until nearly 300,000 troops of the Beihai military region came to support. The Wang family of Beihai was very strong. The defense of Mount Dibbing was very strong. But all this was meaningless for Military Counselor. The internal defense force could indeed monitor every corner outside the core area of Mount Dibbing. But they couldn't stop the mole from the Wang family of Beihai. So he came to Mount Dibbing. He even brought a full set of combat equipment. The plan is going well. In a palace on the top of Mount Dibbing for guests, Military Counselor turned around and looked at his companions in front of him. If there is no problem, put on the equipment now. Our information is very reliable. The internal defense force will change shifts at 11 o'clock tonight. At that time, there will be about a 3-minute gap in their dispatch. Our friends in the Wang family of Beihai can buy us 2 minutes. Plus the time when we take action, the people on the top of the mountain give a warning, and the first batch of elites of the internal defense force arrive at the top of the mountain. We can take action in about 10 minutes. He looked deeply at the figures standing side by side in the dark and said respectfully, "Do you have any questions?" "No problem." Beside Military Counselor, in the dark, there were 10 men in black lined up. They went up the mountain tonight and didn't intend to go down in one piece. They were men of sacrifice. No matter how high their martial arts realm was, men of sacrifice were men of sacrifice. Men of sacrifice didn't need to have problems. Their only task was to die. I can guarantee that everything you've done tonight will be worth it. For your former highness, for your current highness, and for your future highness. Saint walked out of the darkness and said solemnly, "Everything tonight is definitely worth it." Next to Saint stood the Duke and the General. Everyone stood in the darkness, their faces blurry and indistinct. The 10 men in black stood quietly and breathed steadily. Put on the equipment. Military counselor took a deep look at the 10 men as sacrifice in front of him and waved his hand. The men in black began to move. The 4 supermasters of samsara also moved. The equipment they needed tonight had been placed in the dark hall several days in advance, just waiting for their action tonight. Some experts of the Wang family of Beihai living on the top of Mount Dibbing were also transferred to other places for some seemingly coincidental or inevitable reasons. Tonight's action was a plan made by the internal and external cooperation of the Wang family of Beihai. It had been prepared for a long time, and now everything was ready. Military counselor picked up his equipment. In the darkness, it was a black armor. The armor was extremely heavy and reflected a dim light in the darkness. The effect of this armor was almost zero in the actual combat. But tonight, it was destined to play a huge role. Larman Elastic Alf. It was the latest research result of the Germanic military. It was a super strong alloy that could be used in the latest generation of main battle tanks, but now it was made into armor. The only advantage of the armor was that it was strong. It was strong and not easy to destroy. The disadvantage was that it was heavy. I hate this thing. The military advisor sighed and put on the armor that weighed more than 100 kilograms. Saint, General, Duke, and military counselor. The 4 supermasters of samsara all put on their equipment. The 10 black-clothed men donned armor and stood in a row again. It was already 11 o'clock in the evening. The 4 of us will wait here and give the last blow. Military counselor's body was in the armor. His voice buzzed in the hood. Everyone, have a safe trip. Among the 10 men in black, the leader reached out his hand and patted his chest. Then he turned around and walked out of the hall. 10 men in black. Under the 10 metal helmets, there was a calm and indifferent face. They were not afraid of death, because in the hearts of the world, they had been dead for many years. Death was freedom, so they had been free for many years. They didn't care where they died, as long as their death was worthwhile. The 10 men walked out of the hall one by one. When they walked out of the hall, the man in black at the front turned around and looked at the 4 supermasters of samsara in the darkness. Saint and military counselor stood at the front, looking solemn and solemn. They said one sentence respectively. Only 2 words. One sentence was "Don't worry." One sentence was "Worth it." The man in black smiled. Under the hood, his face was a little blurred. Since it was worthwhile to die tonight, there was nothing to worry about. Maybe there were some regrets. They didn't see the day when a young master really ruled the dark world. As for death, there was really nothing to be afraid of. They had been dead for too many years. Their graves were now in linen. Among the tombstones, there were their names. The men in black turned around and began to move forward. They walked out of the hall that was specially used to receive guests. Ahead was the Emperor Hall, which symbolized the status on Mount Dibbing. It was different from the stage of Formidable Person, the holy land of Mount Dibbing. It was different from the World Palace. The Emperor Hall was where Wang Tianzong lived. It was located in the center of Mount Dibbing. Several core laboratories on Mount Dibbing, as well as some secret places such as underground munitions factories, were all behind the Emperor Hall. The eyes of the 10 men in black gradually became sharp. In the night, they sped up, faster and faster. Their armor, which weighed hundreds of kilograms, made a sound as they moved. 10 people, 3 people in a group. As the leader, the man in black was in his own group. The 10 people began to disperse. They began to run. They strode wildly. The ground on Mount Dibbing rumbled. Who? The guards on Mount Dibbing found the abnormality of the first time and instinctively raised a muzzle in their hands. But the 10 people in different directions did not slow down. With great power, they hit the guards and directly rushed to the Emperor Hall. Kill! The man in black, in a single group, suddenly roared. There seemed to be a muffled thunder on Mount Dibbing. The shining blue light suddenly rose to the sky. The thunder light was like a waterfall directly covering the entire Emperor Hall. The light spread over Mount Dibbing. For a moment, the eyes of the 4 supermasters of samsara were focused in front of the Emperor Hall. Wang Tianzong was not on Mount Dibbing. The Emperor Hall was the whole meaning of their action tonight. Endless thunder light continued to explode in the air. The sky seemed to turn blue. When the suddenly focused eyes of military counselor Saint, the tall front door of the Emperor Hall opened quietly. In the blink of an eye, the dark blue curtain of night completely disappeared. There was a dim yellow between heaven and earth. Time seemed to be flowing backward from night to dusk. The dim yellow light enveloped the entire Emperor Hall. The sword light did not seem to appear, but in front of the Emperor Hall, there was sword light everywhere. Every ray of dim yellow light was a sword, an invincible sword, an extremely explosive sword. The man in black who rushed to the Emperor Hall first roared and melted in the dim yellow sword light. Then the brighter blue thunder light lit up, and the target was still the Emperor Hall. The dusk seemed to be flowing, and the sword light kept spreading. There seemed to be a sunset in the night. The sun was setting. The sword light in the night was brighter. A slim and beautiful figure flew out of the Emperor Hall and stood on the eaves above the Emperor Hall. The setting sun rose again in the night. The dim yellow light directly enveloped the entire Mount Dibbing in a flash. The night completely dissipated. The woman on the Emperor Hall waved her hand forward. In the night sky, the dim yellow light suddenly expanded and spread. It was silent, but so beautiful and so dangerous. The woman's long hair kept dancing in the sword light. At this moment, everyone saw her face. That beautiful face was full of coldness and majesty at this time. Summer solstice? Chapter 3:26. It was not the first time that military counselor had seen summer solstice. He was the second supermaster in the Samsara Palace. But if he took off his cloak and came to Mount Dibbing, the hostess of the Wang family of Beihai had to accompany Wang Tianzong, no matter how indifferent she was to the world. This was the minimum respect. Military counselor had been to Mount Dibbing before. Therefore, in his eyes, Xie Ji was an innocent, lively, and intelligent girl. She didn't have any schemes. Even though she was middle-aged, her heart was still as clear as glass and carefree. She was a woman who had been carefully protected and even spoiled by Wang Tianzong. She was so simple as if she lived in a fairy tale world. This was summer solstice in military counselor's eyes. But now, looking at the woman standing quietly above Emperor Palace, military counselor even felt that he had hallucinations. Summer solstice had no schemes, but she had a sword. She had a sword. She had majesty. That was indescribable strength and majesty. The dark night completely faded in front of Emperor Palace. The dim yellow sword light silently extended to every space in front of the palace. A large amount of sword light gathered and did not disperse, directly forming a setting sun above summer solstice. The setting sun became more and more blazing, so the sword intent became purer. This was another expert at the peak of the invincible realm in the Wang family of Beihai. The hostess, who had always played the role of a silly and sweet person in the Wang family of Beihai, might not be interested in strategies and general trends, and she had always enjoyed Wang Tianzong's pampering. It seemed that she had never done anything for the Wang family of Beihai. She didn't need to do anything. Just as Wang Tianzong said, she was beautiful, good at cooking, and could look after the house. Shouldn't a real hostess be like this? Even if she didn't do anything, as long as she was still in Mount Dibbing, Wang Tianzong would have no worries wherever he went. And did she really not do anything? No one knew. But at least Wang Tianzong knew. Many years ago, when he was about to break through to the invincible realm, if summer solstice hadn't gone to the border and made up for the vital combat capability of the invincible realm in the lineup to besiege Li Kuang-tu, it might not have been the Li family, but the Wang family of Beihai, who had committed treason and collapsed. If she hadn't tried her best to break Li Kuang-tu's murderous weapon, Infinite Sky, at the very beginning, she wouldn't have been knocked down from the invincible realm, and she wouldn't have been seriously injured to this day. She had yet to recover from her injuries. But when Wang Tianzong was absent, she could still draw her sword. She had once fallen from the invincible realm, and her foundation had been completely loose. But after more than 20 years of accumulation, even if she was in a special state, when she pulled out the sword now, the sword intent that burst out was still at the peak of the invincible realm. Summer Solstice stretched out her hand, her slender and white fingers grasped behind her. It was a famous sword of the Wang family of Beihai that had not been seen for many years. The body of the sword was slender and simple. The sword was named Autumn Water. The dim yellow sword light scattered in all directions, covering every corner in front of the Emperor Hall. The men of sacrifice who were determined to die were still charging forward. Everyone recognized Xia Ji's sword. In the dim sword light, it was the 24 moves of sword belonging to the Leaf family. Ninth Blade Dusk. With their background, dying under this sword was truly an indescribable irony and desolation. In an instant, the lightning in the dusky world became frenzied. The blue lightning bloomed densely, as if to tear the whole dusk apart. Summer Solstice's palm suddenly grasped the hilt of the sword. The sound of the long sword being unsheathed echoed over Mount Dibbing. The setting sun gathered at the end of the sword. Energy instantly leaped up again. The night had been completely dispelled. The top of Mount Dibbing was full of the dusk. The dusk gently shook. All the lightning was directly suppressed, and there was no sound. The autumn water behind Summer Solstice was unsheathed. The sword light was bright. The sword intent surged again. The dim yellow sword light seemed soft, but it quietly twisted the armor of all the men of sacrifice. Blood spurted out of the armor, reflecting in the dusk, which looked extremely cruel. The remaining group of men of sacrifice was still charging. Even if they were to die, they would die on the way of charging. Summer Solstice's cold and slightly dignified expression did not change at all, but her delicate eyebrows were slightly raised. The long sword Autumn Water was completely unsheathed. The sword light was brilliant. The dim dusk suddenly became chaotic and violent. High up in the sky, the setting sun gathered a lot of rich sword energy and went straight up as the bright sword light was unsheathed. The dusk dissipated in the frenzy. The light on Mount Dibbing multiplied, suppressing the lights, getting brighter and brighter. It was already late at night in Beihai Province, but Mount Dibbing lit up with real light. Sunshine, the setting sun gathered by the sword intent, had completely turned into a scorching sun. Flowers bloomed under the scorching sun. Summer Solstice's graceful body rotated wildly with the sword, like a grand but extremely dangerous dance. The monstrous sword light spread like a flower. Summer Solstice rotated faster and faster. The scorching sun in the sky had completely disappeared, and the light on Mount Dibbing was even brighter. A little flame appeared at the tip of Summer Solstice's sword. As her figure danced, the flames suddenly created a wave of fire that could cover everything. The monstrous sword light raged with the raging fire. The last group of men of sacrifice didn't even have time to do anything. They were directly swallowed by the fire wave and turned into nothingness in the sword intent all over the sky. The eighth blade, burning sky. Summer Solstice's body shook. The spreading fire began to converge toward her. On the top of Mount Dibbing, in the gathering fire, a touch of snow suddenly rose. The moment the sword light, as cold as snow, lit up, Mount Dibbing was full of thunder. The violent blue electric arcs covered everything without warning. Just at the moment when Summer Solstice withdrew her sword and relaxed. This was a real sneak attack and assassination. The means were not despicable and insidious, but the timing was just right. Saint Broke opened the alloy armor on his body. This was his fastest sword, and also his strongest sword in the state of Holy Disciple. The sword intent of this sword was still at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, but its destructive power seemed to have entered the invincible realm. Military Counselor was a little slower than Saint. General and Duke rushed up side by side. Thunderlight. There was only Thunderlight. The thunderlight all over the mountains and plains was completely connected, like a sky covering the night sky, directly shrouding Summer Solstice. Summer Solstice's dress fluttered wildly in the violent sword intent. She held autumn water tightly in her hand, pointed the sword down, and suddenly stabbed into the Emperor Palace under her feet. From a moment, she appeared to the present. She only made 3 sword moves. The moment the 3rd sword move was made, Summer Solstice's aura instantly became weak. But the invisible and intangible sword intent smashed the thunder light all over the sky in an instant. The setting sun dissipated. The scorching sun dissipated. The thunder light dissipated. The top of Mount Dibbing became the purest and deepest black, and only the sword intent was whistling in the quietest darkness. The unique skill of the Wang family of Beihai. Sword of Qingwei. In the thick darkness, there was a clear sound of weapons breaking. The sword light swept over Mount Dibbing. The thunder light lit up in the darkness for a moment, and then disappeared completely. Summer Solstice tightly pursed her red lips and endured it. Her cold eyes looked directly to the east of Mount Dibbing. In the night that was restored to peace, 2 figures, each carrying a figure, staggered and disappeared into the night. The wind on Mount Dibbing blew over. The sound of the waves at the foot of the mountain also became clear. The corner of Summer Solstice's mouth moved. She couldn't help spitting out a mouthful of blood, which dyed the eaves of Emperor Palace red. She looked at her blood with complicated eyes. The sneak attack tonight was nothing to her. She was at the peak of the invincible realm. Except for the experts at the peak of the invincible realm, almost no one could hurt her. No one could hurt her tonight. However, her body could no longer bear the burden of her own sword intent. Summer Solstice sighed softly. Her figure flickered and returned to Emperor Palace. The internal security forces of the Wang family of Beihai, who reacted the fastest, had already rushed to the top of the mountain. But they only saw the door of Emperor Palace slowly closing. "It's okay." Summer Solstice's cold and indifferent voice came from inside. "Don't inform Tianzong." The sword energy on Mount Dibbing fell. The sword energy on Mount Dibbing had reached its peak. The sword intent was like the sea. The sky and the sea were aligned. In the deep and silent darkness, Mount Dibbing, Westlake, and everything else seemed to have completely disappeared. Only the turbulent sea of swords was left. Vibration. The whole Mount Dibbing was shaking under the completely violent sword intent. The whole sea of swords had gone completely crazy. The vast sword intent fell endlessly in the air, and the sword energy rose into the sky. The mighty sword shadows shuttled in every corner of Mount Dibbing. The flowers, plants, and trees on Mount Dibbing, which had been nourished by the fate of the dragon vein, had been completely shattered and disappeared in the turbulence of the Sea of Swords. The once flourishing Mount Dibbing was now only a bare mountain. The mountain gradually cracked in the raging sword intent, and the endless sword shadows did not seem to have a tendency to dissipate and reduce at all. Instead, there were more and more. Li Honghe moved forward slowly in the Sea of Swords. His pace was extremely steady, but also extremely slow. He didn't know where Wang Tianzong was, but he knew Wang Tianzong's character, so he went straight forward. As long as he went forward to the end, no matter where Wang Tianzong was, he could see him. The sword intent was like a tsunami. The surging tide rose. The surging tide fell. Li Honghe had walked hundreds of meters in the Sea of Swords. His body was always shining. The extremely rich sword intent turned into the purest light. Li Honghe was like a ball of light in the Sea of Swords. He was moving forward. The Sea of Swords was retreating. Mount Dibbing, which had been ravaged by the infinite sword energy, had been unrecognizable. Everything had disappeared, including flowers, trees, and wooden houses. Wherever the sword energy passed, the land was completely dried up, and all the water was completely evaporated. Cracks appeared on the dry land one after another. The cracks spread from the top of the mountain and gradually spread to the foot of the mountain. The Li family's cemetery was the only intact place on Mount Dibbing. Li Honghe was standing in front of the cemetery and moving forward. He was moving forward. The Sea of Swords was retreating. Thousands, hundreds of thousands of sword shadows hit the ball of light around Li Honghe without reservation. Blood bloomed all over Li Hong's body. But the overwhelming sea of swords that swept through Mount Dibbing kept retreating. It kept retreating. Countless sword shadows were thrown into the sky messily and fell back again. There were more and more sword shadows. The light around Li Honghe was getting brighter and brighter. All the sword shadows were lifted up by him along the way. A huge wave of thousands of meters high had appeared in front of Li Honghe. They were all swords. There were so many swords that made people desperate. The edge of the sword flashed with dark and deep light. The sword energy surrounded it, and the reincarnation seemed to be endless. The sword energy was like a sea. This was not Wang Tianzong's 6 paths of reincarnation, but it was definitely a sword strike with all his strength. With the Howren sword energy in this sword strike alone, he deserved to be ranked first on the divine list. Li Honghe was still moving forward. His speed gradually accelerated. So the sea of swords was retreating, but the huge wave at the front was getting higher and higher. Thousands of meters. It was getting higher and higher. It seemed to go straight to the sky. Li Honghe walked silently. The light on his body was constant, as if he was going to overturn the whole sea of swords by himself. The sea of swords was like a storm, like a huge wave, with its sharpness shocking the world and endless. There was more and more blood on Li Honghe's body. His aura began to weaken, but the sword intent around him was getting stronger and stronger. Li Tianlan watched all this quietly. The sea of swords was forced back by Li Honghe in front of him. Li Tianlan's position was absolutely safe. He watched the sword light sweep through the world like a tide. He watched the blood burst out on his grandfather's body. He watched the huge wave that could split the sky keep rising. He watched a large number of sword shadows break and reunite. He just watched. His eyes were calm without the slightest emotion. This was the broken reincarnation he had never seen before. The sword energy was as abundant as the sea, and Li Honghe had the power to overturn the whole sea of swords. Li Tianlan had already seen the outcome of this battle. There was no face-to-face battle in this battle. It was purely a contest between sword intent and sword energy. His grandfather could overturn the whole sea of swords, but he couldn't completely defeat it. When the whole sea of swords was overturned, it was also the moment when the sea of swords was completely overturned. At that time, the sea would become the sky. The unprecedented sword intent would completely burst out in the most brilliant way. Li Tianlan didn't know what he could do at that time, but he wanted to try. He had to try. Li Honghe's speed was getting faster and faster. The light formed by the sword intent around him gradually became erratic and unstable. But in the light, the sword intent was suddenly much stronger than before. A large number of sword shadows flew backward in front of him, drifting like fallen leaves. A clear and long whistle suddenly sounded in the heavy sea of swords. The long whistle came from the foot of Lonely Mountain, but the sound that was enough to break gold and stone reached the top of the mountain in an instant. People at the foot of the mountain climbed up. The sword shadows all over Lonely Mountain surged down the mountain at the same time. Standing in Li Honghe's position, he couldn't see Situ Sangyue at the foot of the mountain. But in an instant, he was able to grasp the changes in the sea of swords at the foot of the mountain. Brilliant, like eternal pure light, suddenly lit up on him. The extremely dazzling light shone in the endless sea of swords. Li Honghe's figure suddenly rose into the sky. His figure kept moving forward. The pure light spread unscrupulously in front of him. The whole Lonely Mountain became a world of black and white in the blink of an eye. Li Honghe's body flew in the sea of swords. He had no sword in his hand. However, his entire person had turned into the sharpest sword. Brilliant, like eternal light, was broken in the darkness. The sword intent around Li Honghe condensed, leaving only sharpness. 23rd blade, break eternity. The endless sea of swords began to go berserk like never before. The neat sword shadows were swept away by the condensed sword intent to the extreme and rushed into the sky in disorder. The sword shadows gathered like dragons and kept attacking the sword intent around Li Honghe. Then they were swept away again. The sea was undulating, and the whole sea was rising. Forward. He kept moving forward. Li Honghe seemed to have completely incarnated into a sword. The sea of swords was lifted up, and the monstrous waves rushed into the sky. Li Honghe didn't stop at all and rushed directly to the end of the sea. There was no Wang Tianzong at the end of the sea. But Li Honghe saw Situ Sanyue covered in blood. The sword shadows around Situ Sanyue were rising. The entire sea of swords rose into the air after a brief moment of chaos. One after another, the sword shadows were neatly arranged again. The sea of swords became the sky. It was a sky with a radius of thousands of meters, covering the whole lonely mountain. Looking up, the inverted sword shadows were dense and scattered all over the sky. Li Honghe, whose breath was constantly weakening, had only a dignified look in his eyes. There was a breeze on Lonely Mountain. The endless sword shadows in the sky shimmered in the wind. The light lit up one by one. A weak light, a sharp light, and a cold light. The light occupied all of Li Honghe's vision, like stars all over the sky. Wang Tianzong's voice finally sounded in the nothingness again. It was simple. Senior Li, goodbye. The stars began to fall. They rolled down like the collapsing and pouring Milky Way. His face changed dramatically, and he took a step forward subconsciously. A faintly discernible sigh suddenly rang out in the flourishing galaxy. Then a sword intent that was almost similar to but not exactly the same as the Milky Way appeared on Lonely Mountain and beside Li Honghe without warning. The Milky Way was falling. The ground lit up. The shining light could almost cover everything. The light below was as far as the Milky Way above was. The light and the falling Milky Way kept merging, neither advancing nor retreating. The dazzling light gradually became soft and cold. A slender and elegant figure appeared in front of Li Honghe and Situ Sanyue. He was bathed in light and completely protected the two behind him. The shining Milky Way was still falling. It became more and more determined. The cold and soft light enveloped the whole lonely mountain, shining and rippling against the falling character. The light was as cold as the moon, coldly accommodating the falling stars from the sky. Humph! In the high sky of the nothingness, Wang Tianzong's voice sounded again with faint anger. Fengting, are you going to intervene? Lin Fengting. Li Tianlan froze for a moment. Situ Sanyue also froze for a moment. Everyone in the Li family was a little stunned. I have no choice. In the light, Lin Fengting's voice sounded. His voice was calm and emotionless, just like his mood. Wang Tianzong fell silent. He had no choice. He understood this sentence. There was no choice, and there was no way out. Everything he did was something he had to do. Wang Tianzong's figure appeared high in the sky. The star-like sword shadows were still falling wildly. Wang Tianzong stood high in the sky, as if stepping on the stars. He glanced at Lin Fengting. In the light, even he could not see Lin Fengting's expression. His figure fell for a while. The bright and shining sword shadows became as black as ink in an instant. That was the deepest and purest black. The vast night sky seemed to be torn apart in an instant, and it rained in the nothingness. It was the wildest rainstorm in the dark world in decades. The heavy rain fell with a crash. Lin Fengting still stood where he was. But the light formed by the sword intent around him was constantly rising. The light was constantly changing, turning into the most holy milky white. The milky white light enveloped the whole lonely mountain and continued to rise, like a white torrent breaking through the darkness. Lin Fengting reached for the money. His 5 fingers were all open, as if he could control everything. The milky white light completely dispersed with his movements, and suddenly turned into 2 long rivers flowing in the nothingness. The long river crossed the night sky with different colors. It was as cold as the bright moon. It was as hot as the sun. The light of the sun and the moon spread wildly in the dark black tide at the same time. The lonely mountain in the night was instantly illuminated as bright as day. The sun and the moon were blending and converging, rising and falling in the black tide all over the sky. The black tide was still surging. Chapter 3:27. The sun and the moon rose and fell. The black tide was turbulent and violent. Over Lonely Mountain, it was like a rainstorm that fell late at night, but was illuminated by the sun and the moon at the same time. The heavy rain fell overwhelmingly. The surging sword intent was deep and dark, but it was clear and sharp under the light of the sun and the moon. Extreme light and darkness intertwined. Everything on Lonely Mountain was like a phenomenon of heaven and earth. Lin Fengding did not move. Wang Tianzong did not move. But the completely different sword intent kept spreading, and it kept surging in every corner of the entire Lonely Mountain. This was the confrontation and entanglement at the peak of martial arts. The broken reincarnation had completely disappeared. The black tide and the sun and the moon were all sword intent. There was no unique skill, but the purest and most violent sword intent. The black tide, the rainstorm, the cold moon, the scorching sun, they were all swords. The so-called light and darkness, the so-called phenomenon of heaven and earth, they were all swords. Li Tianlan stared at every scene of the flowing light in front of him. His body was trembling slightly, and a trace of excitement gradually appeared on his pale face. His body subconsciously took a few steps forward, and his eyes were even a little intoxicated. He could no longer see the light and darkness. There was only sword intent in his eyes. If the essence of the world was silence, if the peak of martial arts was illusion, in the silence and illusion, sword moves, sword energy, everything could not exist. In sword arts, only the purest sword intent and sword momentum were the only real. Li Tianlan's world was quiet, and his sight was all illusion. So the seemingly colorful but extremely pure sword intent became the most gorgeous and magnificent picture in his eyes. Li Tianlan sat down. If the peak of martial arts was illusion, it was meaningless to see it or not. He closed his eyes. In the blink of an eye, he directly entered the deepest level of meditation. The endless sword intent became clearer and clearer in his conscious perception. At this moment, he seemed to be touching the essence of the sword intent of the Wang family of Beihai and the Lin clan. The essence of sword intent. The sword intent of the 24 moves of sword was far greater than that of the Wang family of Beihai, and its light was like the sun and the moon. But the sun and the moon would also be silent, silent in the pure darkness. Any light that could dissipate in the darkness was illusion. Only darkness was real. Therefore, although the martial arts of the Wang family of Beihai was not as grand as the 24 moves of sword, it was far more real than the 24 moves of sword. Reality and illusion. This was the essence of the highest level of martial arts, surpassing the level of sword intent, the strength of defense, and all other basic essences. This was the first time Li Tianlan had seen the truth. Illusions could reach the end of martial arts. You could be real too. At this moment, Li Tianlan suddenly thought of deity he met in Heaven Capital, thinking of his sword light that was as vast as the sun and moon, thinking of his truth that was as dark as eternity. He had touched upon the path of the strongest martial arts, but he could no longer reach the end. It was only at this moment that he vaguely understood the ambition of God. Wang Tianzong, Lin Fengding, Shun, every one of them had talent comparable to a genius. The world wouldn't exist just for one person. Everyone had the potential to become a true prodigy. Li Tianlan sat quietly. He seemed to have fallen into the deepest state of nirvana. The entanglement of the black tide and the sun and the moon seemed to be endless. Li Tianlan's figure began to disappear in the sword intent all over the mountains and plains. In a trance, he seemed to have completely left the lock of Wang Tianzong and Lin Fengding's sword intent. It was a great victory. It had been 3 years. Li Tianlan hadn't really shown his strength after his return, but his martial arts had taken half a step forward. This half step was very small, but it had an extraordinary meaning. At this moment, Li Tianlan sat there. His figure had never been blurred, but it had never been clearer. It was like heaven and earth. It was always the most real existence. But because it was too grand, it would always be subconsciously ignored. Wang Tianzong noticed Li Tianlan's change at the first time. Above the black tide, a sharp and cold snort sounded like thunder. In an instant, the black rain all over the sky stopped. The rain-like sword shadows all stopped around the light of the sun and the moon. The sword shadows began to gather wildly. The sword sea turned into a starry sky. The starry sky turned into a rainstorm. The rainstorm turned into a sword sea again. All the sounds on Lonely Mountain disappeared completely. The despairing silence began to spread, and only the sun and the moon remained the same. Looking from distance, the sword sea was like a dark halo flowing around the sun and the moon, covering the entire Lonely Mountain. Li Tianlan didn't move. Lin Fengting's expression suddenly became extremely serious. "Tianzong, do you have to do this?" Lin Fengting said in a deep voice. "The cause of the past is the effect of today. I have no choice." Wang Tianzong's voice was cold. In fact, cause and effect were no longer important. It didn't matter whether the Li family owed the Wang family of Beihai or not. Li Honghe might feel guilty to the Wang family of Beihai, but it would not change anything. Since there was no turning back, he could only make the best of the mistake. Right and wrong could not decide everything. After all, the enemy could only be the enemy. The endless sea of swords rippled for a moment. Countless sword shadows trembled. Around the light of the sun and the moon, the sword sea formed a wave. The wave did not spread outward. Instead, it collapsed inward. In a trance, there was a storm between heaven and earth in the huge tide. An indescribable storm swept through everything along with an earth-shattering boom. The darkness began to become more real than ever. The densely packed sword shadows became extremely crazy in an instant. The storm destroyed everything in the sword shadows. The monstrous black tide rushed towards the sun and the moon in the center without any hesitation. All the sword intent poured out in the most violent way in an instant. The sword sea was collapsing, and the sun and the moon were expanding. The entire Lonely Mountain was shaking and cracking in the extreme outbreak of sword intent. The light of the sun and the moon spread out to the limit. All the sounds disappeared completely in an instant. Only the storm and the tide were still the same. A dazzling white spot suddenly lit up in the center of the sun and the moon. In the silent world, the sun and the moon seemed to explode completely. The white spot suddenly became a dazzling light everywhere. The light swallowed the darkness. The darkness shattered the light. A void appeared in the sky where light and darkness intertwined. The void was formed and shattered. Light and darkness intertwined. The whole sky became mottled with black and white intertwined. In the absolute chaos, Lin Fengting seemed to move. He took a step forward, but the landing point was not in front of him, but directly appeared in the sky thousands of meters above. Wang Tianzong also moved. For the first time, there was a harsh sound of gold and iron colliding in the air. The two long swords seemed to have collided once, but no one could see it clearly. The mottled black and white sky surged and exploded. A blazing white halo appeared in the sky, and all the sword intent kept spreading out in the halo. The mountain collapsed, and the earth cracked. This was a real mountain collapsed, and the earth cracked. There was only light and darkness in the soaring sword intent, and nothing could be seen clearly. The violent sword intent finally began to dissipate. A large amount of smoke and dust spread after the sword intent, covering the field of vision. The smoke and dust gradually dissipated. Li Tianlan was still sitting. Li Tianlan stood in front of Li Honghe and Situ Sangyue. Everyone seemed to have changed their positions, but also seemed to have not changed. Only Wang Tianzong was still floating in the air, cold and majestic, like a god. Lonely Mountain. There was no Lonely Mountain anymore. The whole Lonely Mountain was cut to the ground by this sword. Everything that used to be completely disappeared and no longer existed. Only the Li family's cemetery remained after Lin Fengting's sword light. But only the cemetery was left. The whole lonely mountain seemed to have never existed. The ground of Lonely Mountain, which had become flat, was still cracking. Horrifying cracks appeared one after another on the wall. Wisps of white mist rose from the cracks. The mist appeared quickly, but it never condensed. All the mist seemed to have a master. As soon as it appeared, it began to gather toward Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan was surrounded by mist, and everything became blurred. 3 years ago, Great Master Wu Wei planted a flower. It was called the Dragon Vein Flower. That flower was the key to Li Tianlan's resurrection. The flower was picked, but its roots disappeared in Mount Xinyun and became the flourishing flowers and plants of the whole Lonely Mountain. Now that Lonely Mountain completely disappeared, the remaining lux suddenly turned into white mist again and began to gather toward Li Tianlan. Wang Tianzong watched all this quietly. His eyes narrowed tightly, and for the first time, there was a touch of undisguised fear and killing intent in his eyes. Now Li Tianlan was still weak, but his future was worthy of everyone's real attention. In Wang Tianzong's eyes, Li Tianlan was no longer a threat. He was an opponent. He was a real enemy. Wang Tianzong took a step forward in the air. One step was 100 meters, and he almost reached Li Tianlan. Do you want to make another sword move? Lin Fengting blocked Wang Tianzong's way forward. His face was a little pale, but his aura was still strong. In the final collision, although Lonely Mountain completely disappeared, the Li family still existed. The people of the Li family and the Li family's cemetery survived because they were shrouded by his sword intent. This was the first time that Lin Fengting had completely shown his attitude. When the Li family was destroyed, he didn't know. After the Li family was destroyed, everything was too late. After more than 20 years, Lin Fengting finally stood in front of the Li family. No right or wrong. The dark world didn't need right or wrong or understanding. Only cause and effect were the most real. Fengting, is this your attitude? Wang Tianzong looked into Lin Fengting's eyes. Yes, Lin Fengting said calmly. Is this also the attitude of the Lin clan? Wang Tianzong asked again. Lin Fengting narrowed his eyes. He didn't know the meaning of Wang Tianzong's words. This could be understood as a threat. It could also be understood as a simple inquiry. Lin Fengting suddenly smiled. If you really want to understand it in this way, it's not impossible. The Wang family of Beihai was indeed powerful. They deserved to be called the first force in the dark world. Although the headquarters of the Lin clan stood aloof from the world, but with the branches scattered all over the world, it was also a giant. Even if Lin Fengting could barely integrate the branches everywhere, there would be many internal problems. But there were also internal problems in the Wang family of Beihai. Wang Tianzong's pupils contracted, and he said in a deep voice, "Why?" I have no choice. Lin Fengting shook his head. Wang Tianzong knew that he had asked a nonsense question. Since there was no choice, anything he said was nonsense. The famous sword of the Wang family of Beihai behind him, listen to the sea, shook slightly. The bright sword blade suddenly came out of the sheath. Lin Fengting suddenly raised his eyebrows. This peak invincible realm expert, who had always been playing in the world and seemed to live outside the mortal world, was always free and easy. But as he raised his eyebrows, there was a trace of indescribable sharpness in him. Do you want to fight again? Lin Fengting asked. You're no match for me. Wang Tianzong's tone was straightforward and calm. He was stronger than Lin Fengting, whether it was much stronger or slightly stronger. Strength was strength. All the people of the Li family walked over quietly. In Wang Tianzong's eyes, they might be nonentities, but here, there was no room for them to retreat. The earth-shattering sword strike just now was enough to leave a huge shadow on them. But the nonentities in the shadow could also become warriors. Li Honghe, who was covered in blood, also came over. Situ Sanyue followed him. Wang Tianzong was still calm. It was a calmness of absolute confidence. The only purpose of his coming to Lin and today was to kill Li Honghe in the feud with the Li family and eliminate the threat that the Li family might bring to the Wang family of Beihai in the future. He had noticed that Gu Xingyun had withdrawn from the battlefield, but it didn't matter, even if Lin Fengding stood in front of him at this time. But he could still kill Li Honghe. Why didn't he? Wang Tianzong narrowed his eyes and glanced at Li Tianlan, who was still sitting on ground. The white mist had gradually thinned. Li Tianlan also opened his eyes at the same time. His eyes were calm and deep, and he looked at Wang Tianzong quietly. Wang Tianzong was motionless, as if he was thinking. Li Tianlan seemed to want to say something, but before he finished speaking, he spat out a mouthful of blood and dyed the dry land red. Wang Tianzong's pupils suddenly contracted. Li Tianlan reached out his hand and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. He chuckled and said, "Comfortable. I still underestimated you." Wang Tianzong looked at Li Tianlan and said softly. His voice sounded like a sigh. His sword intent hurt Li Tianlan at the very beginning. But the blood just now was because Li Tianlan was watching his and Lin Fengting's sword intent and hurting his mind. It was not a serious problem. At least compared with the understanding he got, this kind of injury was much lighter. A young man in his early 20s could see the essence of the peak sword intent of swordsmanship. Wang Tianzong felt that he had underestimated Li Tianlan too much. The title of the heavenly son of Zhongzhou State did seem to be worthy of it. Wang Tianzong looked at Li Tianlan quietly. Li Tianlan saw the essence of the supreme swordsmanship. He also vaguely saw Li Tianlan's path. When did you recultivate the 4 realms of martial arts? Wang Tianzong suddenly asked. Li Tianlan's eyes slightly narrowed. 3 years ago. It only took 3 years? Wang Tianzong raised his eyebrows. It was 2 years, Li Tianlan said. Wang Tianzong's mouth twitched. The time is too short. The foundation is unstable. There is still time in the future. Li Tianlan's tone was calm. Wang Tianzong had nothing to say. He recultivated the 4 realms of martial arts in 2 years. Li Tianlan's foundation was indeed unstable. But Li Tianlan took the 4 realms of martial arts as the most basic foundation and starting point, directly jumped out of the 4 realms of martial arts and embarked on a new path. The 4 realms of martial arts were everyone's road to invincibility, but for Li Tianlan, they became the initial foundation. The foundation was unstable. Even if it was unstable, it was much more stable than others. Would you like to join the Wang family of Beihai? Wang Tianzong was silent for a while and then asked. He asked without changing his expression. The Wang family of Beihai has never owed the Li family anything. As long as you are willing to join the Wang family of Beihai, all the grievances can be written off, and I can give you the power to be on an equal footing with Shengshao. Wang Tianzong's tone was calm and solemn. Li Honghe's face suddenly changed, and he said subconsciously, the Li family will not be anyone's vassal. His tone was a little fast, a little hasty, and even a little out of control. The Li family? Wang Tianzong twitched the corner of his mouth with a faint smile. He didn't look at Li Honghe, but at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan was looking at his grandfather, who was covered in blood. He slowly walked to Li Honghe's side, held the old man who was shaking a little, and whispered, "The blood can't be shed in vain." That was his answer. Wang Tianzong's eyes flashed. Lin Fengting, Li Honghe, Situ, Sanyue, plus more than a dozen elites from the Li family. And Li Tianlan. Wang Tianzong kept calculating in his heart. He couldn't kill Lin Fengting. He didn't want to kill him. But if he wanted to kill others, Lin Fengting might not be able to stop him. The premise was that he was willing to pay the price. The price might be heavy, but compared with the Li family, which was more important. The temperature in Wang Tianzong's eyes gradually decreased, and he began to become determined. You refuse me again. Wang Tianzong looked at Li Tianlan. I'm just telling a fact, Li Tianlan said. Until now, I've determined my future path, or the path of the East Emperor Palace. He looked at Wang Tianzong. He suddenly smiled and said, Your Majesty, after the maneuver, the East Emperor Palace will go to Yue to develop. How about that? Wuyue Province. The stability of the Southeast Group was second only to Beihai Province. That was the absolute base camp of Beihai Province, the real back garden. It seemed that the East Emperor Palace was courting death by going to Wuyue. But Wang Tianzong's calm face twisted in an instant. This was a declaration of war. Li Tianlan declared war on the Wang family of Beihai. Moreover, the location he had chosen was so subtle. Are you going to Wuyue? Wang Tianzong asked. How about it? Li Tianlan's tone was calm. No. Before Wang Tianzong could speak, a young and cold female voice suddenly sounded. A white figure walked up the lonely mountain, which had become a piece of flat land. Chapter 328. Li Tianlan instinctively looked in the direction of the sound. The sword intent on the flattened, lonely mountain dissipated, but some sword energy still remained. The broken and out-of-control sword intent filled every corner of the surroundings bit by bit. The night was slightly turbulent, and the starlight fell. Everything in sight was a little blurred in the faint light. In his sight, the long white dress gently fluttered in the night breeze, with a delicate fragrance that Li Tianlan was familiar with but almost forgotten. In a trance, this picture was as beautiful as the most beautiful dream. Li Tianlan froze in place. His heart beat wildly, and his mind was blank. He stared at the figure getting closer and closer to him. Qin Weibai. Li Tianlan had imagined the scene of the two meeting again many times. But in any case, he did not expect that when he was most unprepared, she would appear in front of him so suddenly and naturally. His body was stiff, and the corners of his mouth trembled slightly, but he could not say a word. The residual broken sword energy all over the sky was still a scenery in his eyes. And the slim white figure walked in the residual sword intent, but it seemed that all the scenery was completely lit up in an instant. Qin Weibai was still so simple, but so perfect. Her long hair was tied up, and a green emerald hairpin was inserted in her hair casually. It swayed with her hurried footsteps with intoxicating brilliance. Lonely Mountain, which had been razed to the ground by a sword, was desolate and dilapidated. The sword energy drifted around casually. The bare and almost dead land did not hide her charm at all. Instead, it made her look more dreamy and dazzling. She walked to Li Tianlan. Everything became clear. A clear face. A clear, delicate fragrance. She looked at Li Tianlan. It was a beauty and gentleness that could topple the night sky and make the stars dim. Her eyes were still a little eager, but she always paid attention to her tone. You can't go to Wuyue, she said softly, not forcefully, but with a kind of softness similar to coquettishness. Li Tianlan looked at Qin Weibai motionlessly. It had been 3 years since the final battle of Heaven Capital. He had never seen her again, nor had he heard from her. It was just like when she walked into his world quietly and left without saying a word. Li Tianlan felt that he could only accept everything she did. He could not refuse her approach, nor could he stop her from going away. He could only accept it. Li Tianlan took a deep breath and looked at Qin Weibai, who appeared in front of him again. She was so close. She was so close that as long as he reached out, he would be able to pull her into his arms. She told him not to go to Wuyue. The corners of Li Tianlan's mouth moved. His voice became extremely dry, emotionless, and even devoid of warmth. What? He asked. Qin Weibai's face suddenly turned pale. Wang Tianzong and Lin Fengding raised their eyebrows at the same time. What Li Tianlan asked was why. Not why. It was a difference of one word, but it was two completely different emotions. I don't want you to go to Wuyue, Qin Weibai whispered. Li Tianlan smiled. You don't want to. He recalled everything about him and Qin Weibai. She wanted to walk in her own world, so she became her own woman. She wanted him to enter Sai City, so she became the young governor of Sai City. She wanted to distance herself from him. As a result, the several heavenly kings of Samsara in Tiandu quietly disappeared before the decisive battle. After the decisive battle, she didn't want to have the slightest connection with his future, so she completely cut off all connections between him and her. Now she appeared in front of him again and said that she didn't want him to go to Wu Yue. She expressed what she wanted or didn't want in the most direct way, which was sometimes gentle, but sometimes so cruel. Li Tianlan suddenly found himself so powerless. He couldn't resist Qin Weibai's gentleness, nor could he stop her cruelty. He didn't like this feeling of being controlled, approached, and abandoned from beginning to end. He never had the feeling of being in charge. He didn't understand Qin Weibai's choice every time, but he really cared about her too much. The more he cared about her, the more dissatisfied he was. Li Tianlan's heart gradually became quiet. He felt that his body began to cool down inch by inch from his fingertips. His limbs, torso, heart, and even his voice became extremely cold. "Who are you?" He looked at Qin Weibai and asked. This sentence was like an extremely sharp knife, cutting open his chest in an instant and leaving a bloody scar on his heart. It hurt, but it was almost twisted with pleasure. "My future has nothing to do with you." Then when you stand in front of me, "Who are you? Who are you?" Qin Weibai's face suddenly lost all the blood. Li Tianlan turned directly, looked at Wang Tianzong, and said word by word, "I will go to Wu Yue after the maneuver." "No," the pale Qin Weibai said again. "You can't go to Wu Yue. You will die." "Who are you?" Li Tianlan didn't look back and asked the same question. This cruel question seemed to be dripping blood. "I'm your wife. I won't let you go to Wu Yue. You can't go." Qin Weibai bit her lip and took a step forward, directly hugging Li Tianlan from behind. "Don't be angry with me, okay? I won't allow you to go to Wu Yue, please." She pulled Li Tianlan hard with her small hands, as if she wanted to turn his body around. "Hug me. I won't make you angry in the future." Li Tianlan's body trembled slightly. He tried to maintain his inner anger and resentment, but the delicate fragrance around him seemed to have magic power. It completely destroyed all his reason, his anger, his confusion, and his determination in the first place. Everything became no resistance in front of Qin Weibai. Li Tianlan suddenly turned around and held Qin Weibai in his arms. Completely ignoring other people's gazes, he held Qin Weibai's small face and kissed her directly. Qin Weibai's body stiffened for a moment. Then she obediently reached out and put her arms around his neck, responding carefully. A blush as bright as the morning glow quietly climbed up her face. Li Tianlan's unconscious movement messed up her long hair that was tied up. The turquoise hairpin slipped out of her hair and fell on the dry land. Wang Tianzong, Lin Fengting, Li Honghe, and Situ Tsanyue, the four people's eyes almost followed the turquoise hairpin from top to bottom. The hairpin rolled on the ground. As Li Tianlan moved forward, Qin Weibai raised a small foot and directly stepped on the hairpin. The corners of the four Invincible Realm experts' mouths twitched at the same time. Lin Fengting coughed dryly. Qin Weibai, who finally realized that the occasion was not right, gently pushed Li Tianlan, tilted her head, and whispered, "Wait for the night." "It's night now." Li Tianlan's voice was rough. Qin Weibai gently raised her eyebrows and glanced at Li Tianlan. Her cheeks were red, and she said with a faint smile, "Yes, what do you want to do?" The question was so direct that Li Tianlan suddenly held back all his movements. He took a deep look at Qin Weibai, took a deep breath, and did not speak. Qin Weibai lay in Li Tianlan's arms and whispered, "You're not angry anymore, are you?" Li Tianlan snorted coldly and remained silent. "Then am I your wife?" Qin Weibai asked again. "What do you think?" Li Tianlan glared at her. "Are you done making out?" Wang Tianzong's voice sounded an inappropriate time. Li Tianlan was suddenly shocked, and his heart fluctuated violently. Holding Qin Weibai, he ignored Wang Tianzong for a moment. Qin Weibai turned to look at Wang Tianzong in Li Tianlan's arms. She gently squatted down and picked up the turquoise hairpin on the ground. The hairpin fell to the ground and was stepped on. After picking it up, it was still free of dust and had a soft green luster. Qin Weibai casually tidied her long hair and put the hairpin back on her head. Her movements were elegant and soft, and her aura gradually changed. In a short period of time, she seemed to change from the little woman in Li Tianlan's arms to the number 2 figure of Samsara Palace. "What are you still doing here?" Qin Weibai looked at Wang Tianzong and said in a flat tone. A strong killing intent suddenly flashed through Wang Tianzong's eyes. Qin Weibai asked him what he was still doing here. The other meaning of this sentence was that there was nothing he could do here. Wang Tianzong looked at Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai was still held in Li Tianlan's arms, but she was no longer the little woman who was nervous and a little careful just now. Qin Weibai in Li Tianlan's arms was as strong and cold as a queen at this moment. Wang Tianzong looked at the turquoise hairpin in Qin Weibai's hair. The green light of the hairpin swayed. It carried a faint but extremely clear glow. Wang Tianzong took a deep breath. If there were only Lin Fengting and Situ Tsangyue, he still dared to gamble and take action. At most, he would pay a heavy price. But at this time, there was Qin Weibai. Everything was unpredictable. Qin Weibai was here. The power of Samsara had come near Lonely Mountain. Qin Weibai came. What about the master of Samsara Palace? Even if the master of Samsara Palace did not take action, Qin Weibai would at least have a top combat capability that could not be ignored. Even if all this could be ignored, Li Tianlan could also exert the power of this turquoise hairpin. The hairpin on Qin Weibai's head seemed to be just an ornament, but it was a murderous weapon belonging to Samsara Palace. Blue Sky Underworld. Blue Sky Underworld fired in Europe 3 years ago. In 3 years, even with the intelligence of the Wang family of Beihai, it was not sure whether Blue Sky Underworld had the energy to fire again. The murderous weapon was the weapon of the nation. The energy storage time of the 12 murderous weapons was the most important secret. If Blue Sky Underworld could fire again, the power of one blow was enough to break the balance in the field. How is Gu Xingyan? Wang Tianzong suddenly glanced at Situ Tsangyue and asked. He felt the battle between Gu Xingyun and Situ Tsangyue and heard the roar of the setting sun over Westlake. The weapon of the nation was aimed at the god of war of his country. After this battle, Situ Tsangyue made her position clear, but Sai City also had to pay the price. I don't know. It's best if he dies. Situ Tsangyue said in a flat tone. Gu Xingyun had just returned from Star State and was already injured. Now he was hit by setting sun head-on. He was lucky not to die. At least he couldn't help Wang Tianzong tonight. Wang Tianzong smiled and said coldly, If Gu Xingyan doesn't die, what price will Sai City pay? Have you thought about it? What about you? Situ Tsangyue asked calmly. You came to Linen tonight, but didn't succeed. What price would the Wang family of Beihai pay? Have you thought about it? Wang Tianzong's eyes narrowed, but he did not say much. His figure gradually faded in the ruined, lonely mountain and finally disappeared completely. Sword Emperor's last glance fell on Li Tianlan. His voice echoed in the night sky, plain and clear. East Emperor Palace goes to Wu Yue. The Wang family of Beihai welcomes you very much. It depends on whether you dare to come or not. Qin Weibai in Li Tianlan's arms suddenly tightened and looked at Li Tianlan nervously. Li Tianlan did not respond. He just let go of Qin Weibai and bowed deeply to Lin Fengting. Thank you, Senior. He bowed to Situ Tsangyue again and said respectfully, Thank you, Governor. Qin Weibai stood beside Li Tianlan and bowed to the two with him. Lin Fengting calmly accepted their bows. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.